At my wife's mother's birthday, my wife's sister said, "We didn't order for you," handing me a plate of leftover pasta. While they all ate $15,000 expensive steaks and dessert, my wife added, "You should have sat at the kids' table." I just smiled and said, "Noted." When the waiter came back, I stood up and announced, "Look, I'm not saying I expected a parade when I walked into Le Chateau Noir that Saturday night, but I definitely didn't expect to be treated like the family dog who wandered into a wedding reception uninvited." The restaurant was one of those places where the chandeliers probably cost more than my first car, and the carpet was so plush you felt guilty walking on it with anything less than Italian leather shoes. Everything sparkled like someone had gone absolutely insane with a bedazzler, and the whole place smelled like money mixed with truffle oil and the faint desperation of people trying way too hard to impress each other. This wasn't just any dinner. Oh no, this was Queen Matilda's 60th birthday extravaganza. And by Queen Matilda, I mean my mother-in-law, who genuinely believed she deserved a crown for surviving 6 decades without developing a personality beyond judgmental. The woman had sent out invitations on actual cardstock with gold embossing, like she was announcing a royal coronation instead of admitting she was officially old enough for AARP membership. The dress code was elegant evening attire, which in Zara's family language translates to dress like you're about to inherit a vineyard in Napa Valley, even though you're basically one bad investment away from shopping at Costco. I'll give them credit though, they committed to the bit. Zara's family looked like they'd just stepped off the set of some reality show about wealthy people with boring problems. Her cousin Marcus wore a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, complete with cufflinks that caught the light every time he gestured wildly while telling some story nobody actually cared about. Aunt Helena had draped herself in enough jewelry to set off a metal detector from 3 blocks away. And don't even get me started on Uncle Richard, who showed up in a purple velvet blazer like he was auditioning for a spot in a 1970s funk band, but got lost and ended up at a birthday dinner instead. The whole scene was basically Crazy Rich Relatives, the dinner theater edition, and I was apparently cast as the comic relief nobody wanted. I'd walked in feeling pretty decent about myself, honestly. I'd worn my good suit, the navy one that Zara hadn't openly mocked in at least 6 months, and I'd even splurged on a fresh haircut earlier that week. I thought maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Maybe they'd finally see me as part of the family instead of that guy who somehow tricked their precious Zara into marrying down. Spoiler alert, I was wrong. So wrong. The seating arrangement should have been my first clue. Everyone else had these elegant place cards with calligraphy so fancy it looked like the letters were doing gymnastics. Mine looked like it had been written with a Sharpie by someone's left hand during an earthquake. It was also positioned at the far end of the table, right next to the swinging kitchen doors, which meant I got to enjoy the ambience of stressed-out waiters rushing past me every 45 seconds like I was sitting in the employee break room. But the real kicker came when the food arrived. Picture this. A parade of servers emerged from the kitchen like they were presenting the crown jewels of England. Each plate was a work of art, literally garnished with what I'm pretty sure was edible gold leaf, because apparently regular food isn't fancy enough when you're celebrating being old and judgy. The steaks were imported from some Japanese cow that probably had a better life than most humans, complete with a daily massage routine and a pension plan. I'd heard Matilda bragging earlier that each cut cost about $15,000, which honestly seemed excessive for something you were just going to digest. And, well, you know the rest. Everyone oohed and awed as their plates were set down with the kind of reverence usually reserved for newborn babies or championship trophies. Bianca, Zara's sister and my personal nemesis in designer heels, was practically drooling over her steak like it was going to solve all her problems. Her husband Todd, or as I like to call him, the human Rolex advertisement, was already sawing into his meat with the kind of aggressive enthusiasm that suggested he was compensating for something. And then there was my plate. Bianca herself delivered it, which should have been my second clue that something was deeply, cosmically wrong with this situation. She glided over with this smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile sharks probably practice before they eat seals, and she slid a plate in front of me with all the ceremony of someone tossing table scraps to a stray cat. It was pasta. Cold, leftover pasta. The kind that had clearly been sitting in someone's fridge for at least 3 days. Judging by the way the sauce had congealed into this sad, orangish film that made me question every life choice that had led me to this exact moment. There were a few limp pieces of what might have once been basil on top, now brown and wilted like they'd given up on life entirely. A single, lonely cherry tomato sat in the corner of the plate like it was trying to escape. "We didn't order for you," Bianca said, her voice dripping with so much fake sweetness I could practically feel my pancreas shutting down in protest. She tilted her head like a confused puppy, except puppies are actually cute and don't make you want to flip tables. "I hope you don't mind. We figured you wouldn't want us spending too much money on your meal anyway. You're always talking about being practical and budgeting and all that boring accountant stuff." Around me, the sound of knives cutting through butter-soft steak filled the air like some kind of culinary symphony designed specifically to mock my existence. Everyone was too busy enjoying their $15,000 cow to even acknowledge the absolute war crime that had just been committed against basic human decency right in front of them. Zara, my darling wife, the woman I'd pledged to love and cherish through sickness and health, leaned over from her spot 2 seats away. She'd positioned herself strategically between her mother and Bianca, forming some kind of holy trinity of judgment. Her lips curled into this smirk that I'd seen before, usually right before she said something designed to cut me down to size in front of her family. "You should have sat at the kids' table," she said, loud enough for everyone within a 5-table radius to hear. A few people actually chuckled, like it was the punchline to a joke I hadn't realized I was part of. "At least they're eating chicken fingers. Probably more your speed anyway, right, honey?" The honey at the end was particularly brutal. It's like when someone says, "bless your heart," in the South. Everyone knows it actually means, "you're an idiot and I feel sorry for you." I looked down at my sad plate of depression pasta. Then I looked at their steaks, still steaming slightly, probably imported on a private jet and hand-delivered by someone with a better job than me. I looked at Bianca's face, all smug satisfaction and designer makeup. I looked at Zara, who was already turning back to her conversation with her mother, completely dismissing me like I was background noise. And you know what? Something inside me clicked. I picked up my glass of water, because of course they hadn't even bothered to pour me wine, and I took a long, slow sip. The ice clinked against the glass in the sudden silence that had fallen over our end of the table, everyone waiting to see if I'd finally crack, if I'd finally give them the dramatic meltdown they'd been poking me toward for the past 3 years. I set the glass down carefully. I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a forced smile, but one of those genuine, peaceful smiles that probably scared them more than any tantrum could have. "Noted," I said simply. That's it. One word. But in husband language, in that secret code that develops after years of swallowing your pride and biting your tongue. Noted means something very specific. It means, I'm about to professionally destroy your entire dinner party while maintaining perfect etiquette. It means, you just made a mistake you don't even know you made yet. It means, game on. Bianca's smirk faltered for just a second. Just one tiny second. But I saw it. And that's when I knew tonight was going to be interesting. Let me paint you a picture of Zara's family, because honestly, they deserve their own exhibit in a museum dedicated to people who peaked in high school and never got over it. These people didn't just look down on me. They had it professionally mounted and framed like it was their greatest achievement. I'm talking years of casual cruelty disguised as family banter, the kind of stuff that would make a therapist rub their hands together and whisper job security under their breath. Zara's mother, Matilda, and yes, she genuinely preferred to be called Queen Matilda at family gatherings, which should tell you everything you need to know about her grip on reality, had made it her personal mission since day one to remind everyone within earshot that her daughter had settled. That was her favorite word. Settled. Like I was some kind of clearance item she'd found in the bargain bin at Target, marked down twice, and still not worth the purchase. Zara could have married an architect. Matilda loved to announce at random intervals, usually during holiday dinners or any moment when there was a lull in conversation and she felt the need to fill it with passive-aggressive disappointment. She had 3 architects interested in her, you know? 3. One of them designed that new performing arts center downtown, the one that won awards. But no, she chose accounting. She always said accounting the way most people say root canal or jury duty, with this mix of disgust and resignation, like she was describing a particularly aggressive form of mold. Never mind that architects and accountants make roughly the same salary, or that the award-winning architect she loved to bring up was currently going through his second divorce and living in his mother's basement. Facts didn't matter in Matilda's carefully constructed narrative where I was the villain who stole her daughter's chance at greatness. The rest of the family had taken their cues from her and run with it like it was an Olympic sport. Bianca, Zara's younger sister and the human embodiment of that girl, TikTok you've ever wanted to throw your phone over, had somehow convinced herself that she was a businesswoman because she ran a catering company that mostly relied on Matilda's country club friends feeling obligated to hire her. She showed up to every family event with her husband Todd, who wore more Rolexes than he had actual personality traits. I'm serious. The man had a different watch for every day of the week, and he'd find ways to work them into conversation like they were his children. Oh, this, Todd would say, literally any time someone made the mistake of making eye contact with him. This is the Submariner. Got it in Switzerland. You know, they only make a certain number each year. There's actually a waiting list, but I have a guy. He always had a guy. For watches, for cars, for restaurant reservations, for opinions nobody asked for. Todd collected guys the way normal people collect refrigerator magnets. Bianca loved to corner me at these events and deliver what she probably thought were subtle digs, but were actually about as subtle as a brick through a window. Mason, sweetie, are you still doing people's taxes? That must be so fulfilling. I mean, I couldn't imagine spending all day with numbers and spreadsheets, but someone has to do it, right? The world needs worker bees, not just queen bees like us. Then she'd laugh this high-pitched laugh that sounded like a car alarm having an existential crisis. But honestly, Bianca wasn't even the worst of them. That honor belonged to Dean, Zara's older brother, who had the unique distinction of being both incredibly rich and incredibly stupid, which is a dangerous combination that usually results in a reality TV show or a scandal involving a yacht. Dean had inherited some money from Matilda's side of the family and promptly decided this made him a financial genius, despite the fact that his biggest investment strategy seemed to be buy expensive things and hope they make me look important. He drove a Maserati he couldn't actually afford the maintenance on, lived in a penthouse apartment that was mostly financed by credit cards, and wore suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, but somehow still managed to make him look like a kid playing dress-up in his dad's closet. The absolute worst part about Dean was his complete lack of social awareness. This man once asked me, in front of the entire family at Thanksgiving dinner, if I paid rent per room or per corner. Everyone laughed. Even Zara giggled a little bit before catching herself and squeezing my hand under the table like that somehow made up for not defending me. No, seriously though, Dean had continued, because he was the kind of person who never knew when to stop talking. Like, do apartments that small even have separate rooms? Or is it just one big space where your bed is also your kitchen table? I've always wondered how poor people maximize their square footage. He'd said, poor people, like he was a National Geographic narrator describing an exotic species he'd only read about in textbooks. Never mind that I was sitting right there. Never mind that poor people included like 90% of the actual population. Dean existed in this bubble where anyone who wasn't actively hemorrhaging money on unnecessary luxury items was basically living in a cardboard box. For 3 years, I'd taken this abuse. 3 years of smiling through family dinners where I was the punchline to jokes I didn't find funny. 3 years of Zara promising me it would get better, that they just needed time to warm up to me, that this was just how her family showed affection. 3 years of being introduced to her parents' friends as Zara's husband. He's in accounting, with that same apologetic tone you'd use to explain why you showed up to a party in cargo shorts. I'd ignored the comments about my car, a reliable Honda Civic that Dean once referred to as cute, like a toy car for adults. I'd ignored the jokes about my clothes, my job, my apartment before we got married, my taste in literally everything. I'd smiled and nodded and played the role of the good-natured guy who could take a joke, even when those jokes felt less like comedy and more like death by 1,000 paper cuts. But here's the thing they didn't know, the absolutely delicious thing that I'd been sitting on for the past 6 months like a dragon hoarding the world's most satisfying secret. I wasn't actually just some boring accountant who did people's taxes from a cubicle. I was the CFO of Meridian Holdings, a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring and managing high-end hospitality properties. We owned restaurants, hotels, event spaces, basically anywhere rich people went to spend money while pretending they weren't worried about their portfolios. It was a job I'd worked my ass off to get, climbing the ladder from junior analyst to senior manager to, finally, chief financial officer. I'd earned it through late nights, smart decisions, and actually understanding how money worked instead of just throwing it at problems and hoping for the best. And Le Chateau Noir? This gorgeous, overpriced restaurant where we were currently sitting, where Matilda had insisted on having her birthday dinner because it was exclusive and sophisticated and required reservations 6 months in advance. Yeah, we'd acquired it 3 months ago. Technically, this entire birthday dinner was happening in a restaurant that was under my company's management umbrella. The tables they were sitting at? My payroll maintained them. The waiters serving their $15,000 steaks? Their salaries ran through accounts I personally oversaw. The chandelier Matilda kept pointing at and cooing over? I'd literally approved the budget for its restoration last month. They had no idea. None of them. Zara knew I'd gotten a promotion. I told her I was moving up at work, but she'd been so disinterested in the details that she'd never bothered to ask what exactly my new position entailed. She just knew it came with a bigger paycheck, which meant she could upgrade her handbag collection without me complaining about the credit card bill. As I sat there pushing around my pathetic leftover pasta, watching them all stuff their faces with premium beef and congratulate themselves on being born into the right family, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity. Crystal clear, high definition, 4K clarity about exactly what I needed to do. I'd spent 3 years being their punching bag, their cautionary tale, their example of what happens when you don't aim high enough in life. 3 years of swallowing my pride and biting my tongue because I loved Zara and wanted to make it work with her family. But tonight, with that cold pasta sitting in front of me like a monument to their contempt, tonight, I wasn't in the mood to play nice anymore. They didn't know who they were dealing with. They saw a boring accountant Mason who wore off-the-rack suits and drove a sensible car. They didn't see the guy who'd spent the last decade building real, actual power while they were busy financing their fake lifestyles with debt and delusion. And you know what the best part was? I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to make a scene. I didn't have to stoop to their level of petty cruelty. I just had to let them keep talking long enough to hang themselves. So there I was, fork in hand, staring down at what could only be described as a crime scene involving noodles, and I realized something profound. Revenge is basically just math with better payoff. While everyone else was busy performing their roles in this elaborate theater production called Let's Remind Mason He's Garbage, I was doing what I do best, calculating outcomes, running probability scenarios, and planning exactly how to flip this entire nightmare on its head without spilling a single drop of my water. The thing about being underestimated your entire life is that you develop this superpower. It's like being invisible, except better, because people literally forget you can hear them. They say things around you they'd never say to your face if they actually respected you as a functioning human being with ears and feelings. And tonight they were giving me a masterclass in exactly why they deserved what was coming. I watched Bianca across the table, and I mean really watched her. She was in full performance mode, gesturing wildly with her fork like she was conducting an orchestra, telling everyone about her thriving luxury catering business. The way she emphasized luxury made it sound like she was trying to convince herself as much as everyone else. Her voice carried that particular pitch that wealthy people use when they're one bad quarter away from having to admit they've been living on credit for years. "We just secured the Vanderbilt wedding," she announced, pausing for effect like she'd just revealed she'd been cast as the next Bond villain. 300 guests, completely bespoke menu, ice sculptures, the works. They're paying us $250,000 for a single evening. Can you imagine? Todd nodded along like one of those bobblehead dolls people put on their dashboards, his newest Rolex catching the light every time he reached for his wine glass. "That's my girl," he said, which was somehow both condescending and desperate at the same time. Building an empire one truffle at a time. What Bianca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd seen her company's financial statements. Not because I was snooping, but because 6 weeks ago, Royal Events Catering her biggest supplier and the only reason her little operation hadn't collapsed yet, had come to us looking for acquisition options. They were hemorrhaging money, badly managed, and desperate for someone to buy them out before they went completely under. Meridian Holdings had purchased them for pennies on the dollar. It was almost sad how eager they'd been to sell. And part of that acquisition meant I got access to all their client accounts, their contracts, their entire operational structure, including a very interesting file labeled LeBlanc Luxury Catering, account receivable. Turns out, Bianca owed Royal Events about $200,000 in unpaid invoices. $200,000. She'd been ordering supplies on credit for months, playing this shell game where she'd pay just enough to keep them from cutting her off completely, but never enough to actually clear her debt. It was amateur hour financial management, the kind of thing that made me physically cringe when I reviewed the paperwork. And that Vanderbilt wedding she was bragging about? The one that was supposed to save her business? She'd already committed to a menu that required ingredients she couldn't afford and didn't have the credit line to purchase anymore. Not from Royal Events, anyway. Not now that we own them. I pushed a piece of pasta around my plate and did some quick mental math. If I wanted to, I could call in that debt tomorrow. Just a simple email to our collections department, and Bianca's entire empire would come crashing down faster than you could say bankruptcy court. But that seemed too easy, too quick. Where was the artistry in that? Matilda was holding court at the head of the table, naturally, because the woman couldn't attend an event without positioning herself as the main character. She was going on about some charity gala she was planning, something involving a silent auction and her country club friends competing to see who could spend the most money while claiming to care about poor people. The theme is an evening in Paris, she declared, like she'd just solved world hunger. We're bringing in authentic French champagne, hiring a sommelier, the whole experience. Bianca, darling, you're catering it, aren't you? We need it to be absolutely perfect. Bianca's face did this weird thing where she smiled, but her eyes screamed panic. Of course, mother. I've already started planning the menu. It's going to be Tres Magnifique. She pronounced it Tres Magnifique, which was painful to listen to, but nobody corrected her because this family's knowledge of French began and ended with ordering croissants at Starbucks. I made a mental note. The charity gala was in 6 weeks, right around the time Bianca's suppliers would be cut off and her debt would come due. The timing was almost too perfect. It was like the universe was handing me a gift-wrapped opportunity to watch this entire house of cards collapse in the most spectacular way possible. Dean, meanwhile, was boring some poor cousin from out of town with stories about his latest investment opportunity. I used air quotes in my head because Dean's investment opportunities were usually just expensive mistakes with better marketing. It's cryptocurrency, but for real estate, he was saying, which made absolutely no sense and proved he understood neither cryptocurrency nor real estate. You buy into these digital property tokens, and then when the value goes up, boom, you're making money while you sleep. It's basically printing cash. The cousin nodded politely, probably trying to figure out how to escape the conversation without causing a scene. I knew that feeling intimately. I'd been trying to escape conversations with Dean for 3 years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out casually, expecting some spam notification or maybe my mom asking if I wanted her to bring over leftovers from Sunday dinner. Real leftovers, the kind made with love instead of spite. But it was Leo, my business partner, and the only person at Meridian who knew exactly how much I was secretly worth. Leo was one of those guys who could smell a good revenge plot from a mile away, and he'd been encouraging me for months to stop being so nice to people who didn't deserve it. The text read, "The new audit clause is ready for your signature. Also, you're going to love this. Royal Events contract review turned up some interesting accounting irregularities with the LeBlanc account. Want me to dig deeper?" I felt my smile widen. Not the polite, fake smile I'd been wearing all night. A real one. The kind that probably made me look slightly unhinged if anyone had been paying attention to me, which they weren't. Accounting irregularities. That was Leo's polite way of saying someone had been cooking the books. And if Bianca had been fudging numbers to hide how badly her business was doing, well, that opened up a whole new world of possibilities that went beyond just calling in her debt. I typed back quickly. Dig. I want everything by Monday morning. Perfect timing didn't even begin to cover it. This was divine intervention, karma, and Christmas morning all rolled into one beautiful moment. Zara leaned over again, probably to make another comment about how I looked out of place, or how I was being too quiet, or some other observation designed to make me feel small. But before she could open her mouth, I held up my phone. "Work stuff?" I said simply. "You know how it is. Numbers don't calculate themselves." She rolled her eyes and turned back to her conversation with Bianca about some spa day they were planning. They were talking about hot stone massages and facial treatments that cost more than most people's car payments, completely oblivious to the fact that Bianca might not be able to afford her own spa day in a few weeks, let alone anyone else's. I went back to watching them all, but now it was different. Now I wasn't just the punching bag sitting quietly in the corner. I was a chess player 3 moves ahead, watching my opponents celebrate victories they hadn't actually won yet. Bianca bragged about expansion plans. Dean rambled about his crypto schemes. Matilda preened and accepted compliments. Todd checked his watch for the 15th time. Zara laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, and I sat there with my cold pasta and my warm phone, feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years of family dinners. Power. Here's something they don't teach you in business school, but absolutely should. Humiliation is an art form, and I'd been their favorite canvas for 3 years straight. Every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every random brunch where Matilda decided we all needed to bond over overpriced eggs. I was the entertainment. The punchline. The cautionary tale about what happens when you don't marry up. But here's what art critics never tell you. Sometimes the canvas fights back. See, while they'd been busy perfecting their technique of making me feel like garbage, I'd been doing something revolutionary. Something they couldn't even comprehend because it required actual work instead of just inherited money and delusions of grandeur. I'd been building power. Real, tangible, shut your mouth and sit down kind of power. The silent kind that doesn't need to announce itself at dinner parties because it's too busy actually making moves. Zara used to mock me constantly about my relationship with money. I'd walked into the living room, smiled at her drunk friends who immediately went quiet like kids caught talking about their teacher, and said, "That's because I don't negotiate with emotional terrorists." The room went silent. Zara's face had turned this interesting shade of red that suggested I'd crossed some invisible line by defending myself in my own apartment. Her friends had exchanged those looks that said, "Yikes, trouble in paradise," and I'd simply grabbed my water from the kitchen and gone back to my office. But I'd meant it. Money is emotional for most people. They spend it to feel better, to impress others, to fill some void that probably requires therapy instead of a shopping spree. Me? I treated it like the tool it was. Cold, calculated, strategic. And those strategies had been paying off. Literally. While Dean was buying Maseratis he couldn't afford, and Bianca was playing pretend CEO with a catering company held together by unpaid invoices and prayer, I'd been quietly building a portfolio of investments that would make their heads spin if they knew about it. Shell corporations, holding companies, strategic acquisitions, the kind of boring financial stuff they'd never bother to understand because it didn't come with a logo you could show off. One of those holdings was Emerald Ventures LLC, a company I'd structured specifically to acquire distressed hospitality businesses. And wouldn't you know it, about 8 weeks ago, Emerald had purchased Royal Events Catering for about 60 cents on the dollar. They'd been desperate to sell, drowning in debt, and we'd swooped in like financial vultures with checkbooks. Royal Events was Bianca's lifeline. Her entire business model depended on them. They supplied everything, the ingredients, the equipment rentals, even some of the staff for bigger events. Without Royal Events, Bianca's luxury catering empire was basically just her, a commercial kitchen she rented by the hour, and a dream board she'd probably made during a vision quest at some wellness retreat. And now I owned it. Well, technically Emerald Ventures owned it, and Meridian Holdings had a controlling interest in Emerald Ventures, and I was the CFO of Meridian Holdings. So by the transitive property of corporate structure that they'd never understand, I essentially controlled the company that controlled Bianca's entire future. The beauty of it was the silence. She had no idea. None of them did. They were so busy looking down at me that they never noticed I'd been building a ladder right under their noses. While Bianca bragged about her client list tonight, I knew that client list was about to get a lot shorter. While Dean rambled about his crypto schemes, I knew his investment portfolio was probably worth less than my grocery budget. While Matilda preened about her charity connections, I knew half those connections were people whose businesses I'd either acquired or analyzed for acquisition. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy and makes you do stupid things. What I felt was colder, clearer. It was the feeling you get when you've finally decided to stop playing defense and go on offense. When you realize you're not stuck in their game. You're just letting them think they're winning while you rewrite the rules. Zara had once told me during an argument that I needed to be more ambitious, like her family. She'd actually said that. Like watching Dean finance a lifestyle he couldn't afford, or Bianca pretend her way through running a business was somehow the blueprint for success. I told her then that ambition without strategy is just expensive failure with better lighting. She hadn't understood, but she would. They all would. Because tonight, sitting here with my sad pasta and my quiet calculations, I decided something important. I was done being the family joke. Done being the one they pitted and mocked and treated like an embarrassing relative they had to tolerate. It was time for them to see exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. And the best part? They were going to destroy themselves. I just had to give them enough rope and watch them braid it into a noose. The universe has impeccable timing sometimes, and tonight it was showing off. Just as I'd finished mentally calculating exactly how many ways I could professionally ruin everyone at this table, our waiter materialized beside me like he'd been summoned by my thoughts alone. His name was Marcus. I could see it on his name tag, and he had that particular expression that good waiters develop after years of serving wealthy people. Polite interest masking complete awareness of all the dysfunction happening around him. "How is everything this evening, sir?" Marcus asked, his eyes briefly flickering to my pasta with what I'm pretty sure was sympathy. The man had probably seen some things working at Le Chateau Noir, but even he seemed mildly horrified by the sad plate of leftovers sitting in front of me while everyone else ate, like Roman emperors at a feast. I looked up at him, and something just clicked. Maybe it was the Leo's text still burning a hole in my pocket. Maybe it was 3 years of accumulated spite finally reaching critical mass. Or maybe I was just tired of being the bigger person when nobody else at this table could even spell maturity without autocorrect. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way you do when you're about to either propose a toast or start a fight, and people can't quite tell which one it's going to be. My chair scraped against the expensive hardwood floor, and the sound cut through the dinner conversation like a record scratch in a movie. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even Todd stopped checking his watch, which was honestly more shocking than anything else. I picked up my water glass and tapped it gently with my fork. The crystal rang out clear and sharp, and suddenly I had everyone's attention. All eyes on Mason, the guy they'd been ignoring all night except when they needed someone to mock. The power in that moment was intoxicating. "Marcus," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent table. "I'll take the private suite. The Bordeaux room, if it's available." I paused, letting that sink in. The Bordeaux room was legendary. It seated up to 20 people, had its own sommelier, and cost more to reserve than most people's monthly rent. And whatever the chef recommends for everyone here. The full experience. Wine pairings, appetizers, the works. All on me. You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a pin thinking about dropping and then deciding against it because the silence was that profound. Bianca was the first to break it, naturally. She snorted, actually snorted, like I'd just announced I was buying everyone a trip to Mars. "You? On you." She looked around the table for support, that mean girl smirk plastered across her face. "Mason, sweetie, this isn't Olive Garden. You can't just use unlimited breadsticks as a flex here." A few people laughed nervously. Todd grinned like Christmas had come early. Matilda raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow, the universal gesture for "this should be entertaining." But it was Zara's reaction that really got me. My own wife, the woman who'd promised to love and cherish me, who'd stood at an altar and made vows that apparently came with an asterisk for family dinners, rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't get stuck. "You can't even afford dessert here, Mason," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She said it loud enough for the tables near us to hear, because public humiliation is apparently a family value in the LeBlanc household. "Let's not embarrass ourselves more than we already have tonight, okay?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and I smiled. Not the fake, plastered-on smile I'd been wearing all evening. Not the tight-lipped, "I'm fine, everything is fine" smile I'd perfected over 3 years of family torture. This was something different. Something that probably looked peaceful on the surface, but had an undercurrent of danger running through it like an electrical wire in bathwater. "Oh, I can," I said softly, which somehow made it more effective than shouting. The whole table leaned in slightly to hear me. "In fact, you're all going to love the presentation. It comes with surprise side effects." "Like what?" Dean asked, because the man had never met a setup he didn't walk directly into. I turned to him, still smiling that dangerous smile. "Like humility, and maybe a side of perspective. Chef's specialty, apparently." Marcus, bless him, didn't even blink. Professional to his core, he just nodded smoothly and gestured toward the back of the restaurant. "Right this way, sir. I'll inform the chef immediately. Should I have the sommelier bring the reserve collection for the wine pairings?" "Please do," I said, like I ordered 5-figure dinners every Tuesday. "And Marcus, take your time with the presentation. I want everyone to really savor this." The double meaning wasn't lost on him. I caught the tiniest quirk of his lips before he resumed his professional mask. As I followed Marcus toward the private dining area, the whispers erupted behind me like I'd just announced I was running for president or joining a cult. I could hear Bianca's voice rising above the others. "Is he serious? Where did he even get that kind of money? Did he rob a bank?" Zara was frantically whispering something to her mother, probably trying to figure out if this was real or if I'd finally had a complete mental breakdown and was about to humiliate us both. Todd was already pulling out his phone, probably trying to Google how much the Bordeaux room cost, so he could calculate exactly how much I was about to waste trying to impress people who'd never respect me anyway. But here's what none of them understood. I wasn't trying to impress them. I was setting the stage, and the main act was about to begin. The walk to the back of Le Chateau Noir felt like the longest and shortest journey of my life simultaneously. Marcus led me through the main dining room, past tables full of people pretending not to stare while absolutely staring, their conversations pausing mid-sentence as we glided by. I could practically feel their curiosity burning holes in my back. Who was this guy in the decent but not designer suit commanding a private suite like he owned the place? Little did they know I basically did. The Bordeaux room was tucked away behind a set of mahogany doors that looked like they'd been imported from a French castle, which they probably had been because rich people love nothing more than eating dinner surrounded by things that used to belong to dead aristocrats. Marcus pushed them open with a flourish, and I had to admit, even knowing what to expect, the room was impressive as hell. Pure elegance didn't even begin to cover it. The walls were this deep, rich mahogany that gleamed under the soft lighting from actual crystal chandeliers. Not the fake ones you get at Home Depot, but the real deal that probably required their own insurance policy. The chairs were upholstered in burgundy velvet that looked like it cost more per square inch than my first apartment's entire security deposit. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers, the kind of instrumental music that made you feel sophisticated even if you were just sitting there eating chicken nuggets. The table could easily seat 20, set with china so delicate you could probably read a newspaper through it if you held it up to the light. Each place setting had more forks than any human should reasonably need for a single meal, arranged in some mysterious order that I'm sure made sense to people who went to finishing school, but looked like a weird puzzle to normal folks. Before Marcus could launch into his prepared speech about the room's features, Eduardo appeared from a side door like a magic trick. Eduardo Martinez was the restaurant manager and, more importantly, one of my favorite people in the entire hospitality industry. We'd worked together back when I was still climbing the corporate ladder, back when I was analyzing acquisition targets, and he was running operations at a boutique hotel we'd purchased. When Meridian acquired Le Chateau Noir, I'd personally called him and offered him the manager position. Best decision I'd made in months. He was grinning at me now with that knowing look that said he'd already heard about the pasta incident and was absolutely living for whatever was about to happen next. "Mason," he said warmly, pulling me into one of those half-hug, half-handshake things that guys do when they're actually friends but don't want to seem too emotional about it. "I heard you were dining with us tonight. Why didn't you call ahead? I would have prepared something special." "You mean something more special than cold leftover pasta?" I asked, and his grin widened into something that looked almost feral. "I heard about that," Eduardo said, his accent making even his disgust sound elegant. "Maria in the kitchen is personally offended. She's been cursing in Spanish for the last 10 minutes about the disrespect of serving garbage to guests." He paused, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Though she was very pleased when she heard you were moving everyone to the Bordeaux room. She's already planning the menu. I think she wants to make a statement. Let her, I said. In fact, encourage her. I want this meal to be memorable. Eduardo's expression shifted into something more serious, though the amusement never quite left his eyes. Same tab as usual? He asked quietly, and I knew what he was really asking. We had several billing structures at Le Chateau Noir. Personal accounts, corporate accounts, investment accounts. Each one sent the bill to different places, showed up on different ledgers. Exactly, I confirmed. Bill it to the parent company, Meridian Holdings. I want this one on the official books. He nodded, understanding immediately. This wasn't just dinner. This was a statement. A line in the sand. A receipt for everyone at that table to remember. Consider it done, Eduardo said. And Mason? Thank you. This is the most entertainment I've had all month. The staff is already placing bets on how your in-laws are going to react when they realize what's happening. What's the current spread? I asked, because I couldn't resist. Maria thinks at least 2 people will cry. Jorge, the sous chef, bets someone throws a drink. I personally think your mother-in-law might actually short-circuit and start speaking in tongues. We both laughed, and for a moment I felt lighter than I had in months. This was what I'd been missing, people who actually got it. Who understood that sometimes you need to make a dramatic gesture not because you're petty, but because you're done being treated like you're worthless. I should get back out there, I said. Don't want them thinking I'm negotiating a payment plan. Go, Eduardo said, making a shooing motion. And Mason, enjoy this. You've earned it. I walked back through those mahogany doors feeling like a completely different person than the one who'd entered 30 minutes ago. The main dining room conversations had resumed, but I could still feel the eyes on me, the curiosity, the speculation. Let them wonder. Let them all wonder. My in-laws were exactly where I'd left them, though now they were in full gossip mode. Their heads were huddled together like they were planning a heist or trying to figure out if I'd had a psychotic break. The conversation died the second I came into view, everyone straightening up and trying to look casual, like they hadn't just been dissecting my financial situation and mental stability. I walked back to my seat slowly, savoring every second of their uncomfortable silence. Zara was chewing on her bottom lip, something she only did when she was genuinely worried. Good. She should be worried. Just as I reached the table, Zara couldn't help herself. She never could. He's probably asking if they accept coupons, she said to Bianca, loud enough for me to hear, but quiet enough that she could pretend she didn't mean for me to. Classic Zara. Cowardly cruelty disguised as jokes. I didn't sit down. Instead, I picked up my water glass and clinked it again, commanding their attention one more time. Every single person at that table looked up at me, and I let the moment stretch out just long enough to make them squirm. Dinner's on me, everyone, I announced, my voice carrying across the restaurant. Other tables were definitely listening now. The staff will move us to the private suite shortly. My wife says I should sit with the kids. I paused, letting Zara's face turn an interesting shade of pink. So let's make sure the grown-ups can actually see what good parenting looks like when you stop underestimating people. Even Marcus, standing a respectful distance away with a tray, couldn't quite hide his smirk. Matilda's mouth opened and closed like a fish trying to understand calculus. Dean looked confused, which was his default setting anyway. Todd was frantically Googling something on his phone, probably trying to calculate if this was real or some elaborate prank. But it was Bianca's face that I enjoyed most. That confident smirk had vanished completely, replaced by something that looked almost like fear, like she was just starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd been underestimating the wrong person. Shall we? I gestured toward the mahogany doors, every inch the gracious host they'd never believed I could be. The show was just getting started. Moving a party of 15 people from one dining area to another in a high-end restaurant is apparently choreographed like a military operation, and watching my in-laws try to maintain their dignity during the transition was better than anything Netflix could have streamed. They shuffled through the restaurant like a parade of confused peacocks, trying to look like they'd totally expected this turn of events, while also clearly having no idea what the hell was happening or how I was pulling it off. Matilda led the procession with her chin held so high she was practically looking at the ceiling, determined to act like private dining rooms were something she did every Tuesday. Dean kept looking around like he was trying to figure out if this was all an elaborate prank show and cameras were about to pop out from behind the wine racks. Todd had his phone out, probably cross-referencing Le Chateau Noir's prices with his mental calculation of my supposed bank account and coming up with an error message. But Zara? My darling wife was doing this thing where she smiled at other diners as we passed, like she was graciously accepting their invisible applause, while simultaneously shooting me these confused looks that screamed, "What is happening, and how are you affording this? And please don't embarrass me more than you already have." Too late for that last one, sweetheart. Once everyone was settled into the Bordeaux room, and I mean settled, because it took Matilda approximately 10 minutes to decide which seat gave her the best angle to be photographed for Instagram, the real magic began. Eduardo had outdone himself. The man understood assignment at a molecular level. The doors swung open, and a parade of servers emerged like they were presenting the crown jewels to royalty. And honestly, considering what this meal was about to cost, we might as well have been eating actual jewels. Each server moved with that synchronized precision you only get from people who've been trained to treat food like it's a religious experience. The first course arrived on plates that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. We're talking about appetizers that looked like tiny edible sculptures, seared scallops arranged like flower petals, some kind of foam that I'm pretty sure was made from champagne and dreams, garnishes so delicate they looked like they'd been placed by a surgeon with OCD. The kind of food that makes you almost feel guilty eating it because it's too pretty to destroy. Then came the main event. If the steaks they'd been eating in the main dining room were impressive, these were legendary. Maria had clearly taken my request for memorable and translated it to make them weep with joy and also regret. Each cut was easily twice the size of what they'd been served earlier, cooked to absolute perfection, with a crust that looked like it had been seared by the actual sun. They were plated with roasted vegetables that had probably been individually interviewed before being selected, and some kind of sauce that the server described in French that I didn't understand, but sounded expensive as hell. The wine, oh man, the wine. The sommelier brought out bottles that didn't have prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. We're talking vintages older than some of the people at the table, wines that had been aging in cellars in France since before I was born, just waiting for this exact moment to make my in-laws question everything they thought they knew about their broke son-in-law. Bianca's face was absolutely priceless. Her eyes had gone so wide I was worried they might actually fall out of her head and roll across the table. She was gawking at her plate like it had just performed a magic trick, her mouth slightly open in this expression of shock and awe that I wished I could have captured on video and made my phone's wallpaper. This is Michelin level, she stammered, and I noticed her hands were actually shaking slightly as she picked up her fork. The confidence, the smugness, the casual cruelty, all of it had evaporated like water on a hot pan. "Mason, how did you? Where did you?" "Connections," I said simply, cutting into my own steak with the casual ease of someone who definitely had not been served leftover pasta an hour ago. The meat was so tender it practically melted under my knife. "You could say I've got a few. You know how it is in my line of work. You meet people, build relationships, do favors. Eventually, those favors get returned." I took a bite and made a show of savoring it, because petty is an art form and I was painting a masterpiece. "This is incredible. Maria really outdid herself. That's the head chef, by the way. We go way back. She takes it personally when guests aren't treated properly, so when I told her about the pasta situation, well, let's just say she wanted to make a statement about proper hospitality." The table had gone quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. This wasn't the smug silence of people enjoying watching someone squirm. This was the uncomfortable silence of people realizing they might have severely miscalculated something important. Zara was doing that thing where she tried to recover social situations through sheer force of will. She leaned toward me, her voice low but still carrying because the woman had never mastered the concept of an actual whisper. "You didn't have to show off like this, Mason. It's a bit much, don't you think?" I turned to her slowly, fork poised midair, and smiled. God, I was getting good at that smile. The one that looked friendly but had teeth behind it. "I'm not showing off," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear because if she couldn't whisper properly, neither would I. "I'm just upgrading the table. You know, the one you said I didn't belong at? Turns out I can set a pretty good table myself when I'm not being served leftovers like a stray dog someone felt sorry for." You could have heard a pin drop. Actually, you could have heard a pin thinking about dropping, deciding against it, and then leaving to find a less awkward room to drop in. Matilda looked like she was trying to solve a complex equation in her head, and all the numbers kept turning into question marks. Dean had stopped eating entirely, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth, a piece of perfectly cooked beef just hanging there while his brain tried to process this new reality. But the best part, the absolute cherry on top of this satisfaction sundae, was the kids' table. Yeah, there were actually kids at this dinner, Zara's cousin's children who'd been relegated to a smaller table in the corner because children under 12 apparently couldn't be trusted around Matilda's birthday celebration. They'd been served chicken fingers and fries, which honestly seemed like the better deal until now. When the servers brought out dessert, my moment of true victory arrived. Chocolate lava cake, the real deal, where the chocolate literally flows out like volcanic glory when you cut into it. Each cake was topped with gold leaf because Eduardo had apparently decided to go full dramatic, served with vanilla bean ice cream that was probably made from beans hand-picked by monks in Madagascar or something equally ridiculous. The kids absolutely lost their minds. I heard one of them, little Sophie, I think her name was, actually squeal with delight. They'd been stuck eating basic kids' menu food while the adults feasted, and now they were getting the royal treatment. I caught Eduardo's eye and nodded toward the kids' table. He understood immediately, the beautiful man. Within minutes, servers were bringing identical lava cakes to the children, complete with extra ice cream and sparklers that made the whole thing look like a birthday cake explosion. The kids erupted in cheers. Actual, genuine, joyful cheers. Sophie started chanting, "Uncle Mason! Uncle Mason!" Even though she barely knew me, and the other kids joined in like I'd just announced they were all going to Disneyland. I walked over to their table, grabbed one of the dessert plates, and brought it back to my nephew Tyler, the only one of Zara's relatives under 18 who'd ever been nice to me. The kid was 8 and had once told me my Honda Civic was actually pretty cool because it looks like a spaceship if you squint. "Here, champ," I said, sliding the plate in front of him. "Always remember, don't ever treat anyone like leftovers. People remember that stuff. And when you grow up, be the kind of person who shares the good dessert." Tyler looked up at me with chocolate already smeared on his face and grinned. "Uncle Mason, you're so funny." I winked at him. "No, buddy, I'm fed up. There's a difference." When I turned back to the adult table, every single person was staring at me like I'd just performed a miracle or possibly committed a crime. It was hard to tell which they found more disturbing, that I could afford this, that I'd orchestrated it so perfectly, or that the children liked me more than they liked any of them. Probably all three. Dessert was winding down, chocolate smears on plates like abstract art, and I could see the adults at the table starting to do that mental math people do when an expensive meal is coming to an end. You know the look, that subtle anxiety that creeps across faces when everyone's trying to figure out how to split a bill that probably costs more than a used car. Except tonight, there was an added layer of confusion because nobody could quite figure out how I was planning to pay for any of this. Todd kept glancing at his watch, then at me, then back at his watch, like the time display might suddenly reveal my secret. Dean was doing this thing where he pretended to be relaxed, but his leg was bouncing under the table hard enough that I could feel the vibrations. Even Matilda, who prided herself on never showing weakness or concern, had this tiny crease between her eyebrows that suggested her brain was working overtime, trying to solve the puzzle of how her loser son-in-law had just dropped what was probably a 5-figure dinner tab without breaking a sweat. Bianca had been unusually quiet for the last 20 minutes, which was alarming because the woman normally couldn't go 20 seconds without reminding everyone in a 5-mile radius about her business acumen or her luxury lifestyle or whatever new accomplishment she'd invented that day. She kept staring at her wine glass like it held the answers to life's greatest mysteries, occasionally glancing up at me with this expression that I can only describe as dawning horror mixed with confusion. Zara, sitting next to me, was doing her absolute best to maintain composure, but I could see the cracks forming. She kept smoothing down her dress, a nervous habit she'd developed over the years, and every few minutes she'd lean over like she was going to say something to me, then think better of it and retreat back to her seat. The woman was dying to ask me what was happening, but her pride wouldn't let her admit that she had no idea what her own husband was capable of. That's when Eduardo appeared, moving through the room with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from managing high-end establishments where discretion is literally part of the job description. He was carrying a leather portfolio, the kind fancy restaurants used to present checks, because apparently regular paper isn't sophisticated enough when you're charging people the GDP of a small country for a meal. He approached the table with a professional smile, and I watched as everyone tensed up simultaneously. It was like watching a group of deer realize they'd wandered into a hunter's convention. Matilda, because she physically couldn't help herself, immediately reached for the portfolio. Her perfectly manicured hand extended across the table with the kind of entitlement that suggested she'd never been told no in her entire life and wasn't about to start now. I'm pretty sure she wanted to see the damage, wanted to calculate exactly how much I'd just spent, wanted ammunition for future family gatherings where she could tell everyone about the time Mason tried to impress them all and probably went into crippling debt doing it. But Eduardo, bless his professionally trained soul, smoothly intercepted her reach with the grace of a matador dodging a bull. He shifted the portfolio just slightly to the left, still smiling that polite smile that somehow conveyed, "Nice try, but absolutely not," without saying a word. "Already cleared by the corporate account, ma'am," Eduardo said, his voice carrying that particular tone of finality that good service industry people perfect over years of dealing with entitled customers. No signature required. Everything's been handled. The table went so quiet you could have heard a mouse sneeze in the kitchen 3 rooms away. Matilda's hand froze in midair, her fingers still slightly curled from her attempted grab. She looked at Eduardo like he'd just spoken ancient Sumerian. "Corporate what?" Zara's head whipped toward me, so fast I'm surprised she didn't get whiplash. Her eyes were wide, her mouth slightly open, and I could practically see the gears in her brain grinding to a halt as they tried to process this new information. "Corporate account," she repeated, her voice climbing half an octave. "What corporate account? Mason, what is he talking about?" I took my time responding. Picked up my wine glass, the really nice wine, the kind that costs more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month, and swirled it slowly, watching the liquid catch the light from the chandelier above us. I let the moment stretch out like taffy, savoring every second of their collective confusion and mounting panic. "Oh," I said finally, as if I'd just remembered something mildly interesting rather than dropping a bomb that was about to crater their entire perception of reality. "That's the best part, actually. See, Le Chateau Noir, this restaurant where we're currently sitting, enjoying this lovely meal, is managed by a hospitality firm. Meridian Holdings, to be specific." I paused for effect, took a sip of wine. "Perfect." Maria really knew her stuff. "And Meridian Holdings," I continued, "recently expanded its portfolio. Acquisitions, you know how it goes. Buying up businesses, restructuring them, improving operations. Standard private equity stuff. Really boring, actually, unless you're into that kind of thing." Dean was nodding along like he understood, which was hilarious because the man probably thought private equity was something you kept in a safe. "Anyway," I said, setting down my glass with a gentle clink, "one of our recent acquisitions was Royal Events Catering." The temperature in the room dropped about 40 degrees. Bianca's wine glass slipped from her fingers. Not dramatically. She caught it before it shattered, but the fumble was there, visible, a crack in her usually perfect composure. The color drained from her face so fast I was momentarily concerned she might actually pass out. "That's," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's my company's biggest supplier. Used to be," I corrected gently, like I was helping her with a minor factual error rather than basically announcing the end of her business as she knew it. "Used to be your biggest supplier. See, when we took over Royal Events, we did what any responsible financial institution does. We conducted a thorough audit of all their accounts. Due diligence. Standard procedure." Todd had gone completely still, his fork hovering in the air like it had forgotten its purpose in life. His face had taken on this grayish tinge that suggested his fancy Rolex wasn't helping him tell time anymore, just marking the seconds until his wife's business empire collapsed. "And during that audit," I continued, because I was on a roll and there was no stopping this train now, "we found some interesting discrepancies. Accounting irregularities, if you want to use the technical term. Unpaid invoices stretching back months. Creative bookkeeping. The kind of thing that makes CFOs very nervous and lawyers very excited. Bianca made this sound. Not quite a gasp, not quite a whimper, somewhere in between. Her husband had set down his fork entirely now and was gripping the edge of the table like he was on a boat in rough seas. Now, normally, I said, leaning back in my chair with the casual ease of someone who absolutely held all the cards, we'd work with vendors to sort out these issues. Payment plans, restructuring, that kind of thing. But given the extent of the, let's call them creative accounting practices, and the total amount owed, which I believe is somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000, we've had to make some difficult business decisions. 200,000. I let that number hang in the air like smoke. Matilda's mouth had fallen completely open. She was staring at Bianca with an expression that combined horror, disappointment, and the dawning realization that her daughter's successful luxury catering business was actually a house of cards held together with unpaid invoices and pure delusion. You, Matilda started, then stopped. Started again. You sabotaged your own family? Your own sister-in-law? What kind of monster? I didn't sabotage anyone. I interrupted, my voice still calm, still pleasant, still absolutely done with their nonsense. Bianca sabotaged herself when she decided to run a business on credit she couldn't pay back. I just stopped enabling it. There's a difference. I turned to Bianca directly, and for a moment I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered the pasta, and the years of condescension, and the casual cruelty disguised as family bonding. You spent 3 years treating me like I didn't understand business, I said quietly. Like I was just some boring accountant who couldn't possibly comprehend your entrepreneurial genius. But here's the thing, Bianca, I understand business perfectly. I understand it well enough to know that what you were doing wasn't business at all. It was a very expensive fantasy funded by other people's money. The silence that followed was deafening. If silence could shatter glass, the Bordeaux room would have looked like a crime scene. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the soft jazz playing in the background seemed to get quieter, like the music itself was uncomfortable being a witness to this family's complete implosion. It was the kind of silence that comes right before something catastrophic happens, a tsunami, an earthquake, or in this case, my wife losing her absolute mind. Zara's voice cut through the quiet like a chainsaw through butter. You're petty, she hissed, and I do mean hissed, like she'd transformed into some kind of angry snake that wore designer clothes and had a credit score hanging on by a thread. Her face had gone from pale to red so fast I was genuinely concerned about her blood pressure. This is the most petty, vindictive, absolutely insane thing you've ever done, Mason. What is wrong with you? I turned to look at my wife, the woman I'd married 3 years ago when I still believed love could conquer family dysfunction and basic human decency, and I felt nothing but tired amusement. Not anger. Not hurt. Just this profound sense of clarity that comes when you finally stop pretending everything's fine when it's very clearly not. Correction, I said, holding up one finger like a professor making an important point. I'm professionally petty. There's a difference. Regular petty is slashing someone's tires or posting vague Facebook statuses. Professional petty is using legitimate business practices and legal financial instruments to prove a point while maintaining complete ethical integrity. It's petty with paperwork, if you will. Dean, who'd been silent through most of this disaster, suddenly found his voice. You can't just destroy someone's business because your feelings got hurt over dinner. That's psychotic. Feelings. I laughed, and even I was surprised by how genuine it sounded. Dean, buddy, this has nothing to do with feelings. This is about basic financial responsibility and the natural consequences of poor business decisions. Bianca's company has been operating in the red for months, possibly years. She's been using Royal Events credit line like her personal piggy bank, ordering supplies she couldn't pay for, and hoping nobody would notice or care. That's not feelings, that's fraud. Bianca finally found enough oxygen to speak, though her voice came out strangled and desperate. You don't understand. The business needed time to grow. I was building something. You can't just pull the rug out from under. Actually, I can, I interrupted, reaching into my jacket pocket. And I brought receipts. Literally. From my inside pocket, I pulled out a folder. Manila. Boring. The kind of folder that accountants and lawyers use when they're about to ruin your whole day. I prepared it this morning, printed everything out at the office, organized it with little tabs and everything, because if you're going to destroy someone's financial security, you might as well be thorough about it. I slid the folder across the table toward Bianca with the casual ease of someone passing the salt. It stopped right in front of her plate, which still had half a chocolate lava cake on it. The dessert seemed obscene now, a monument to excess in the face of impending financial ruin. Go ahead, I said. Open it. I think you'll find it very educational. Bianca's hands were shaking as she reached for the folder. Todd leaned in close, his face already pale, probably running calculations in his head about how this was going to affect their lifestyle, their social standing, his precious watch collection. The folder contained everything. And I mean everything. Copies of invoices with overdue stamped in red across them. Spreadsheets showing months of unpaid bills. Email correspondence between Royal Events and Bianca's company, getting progressively more desperate as the debt mounted. Bank statements, redacted appropriately, because I'm not a complete monster, showing negative balances and bounced checks. A summary of her debt that I'd personally compiled, broken down by category, with charts and graphs because presentation matters. The crown jewel, though, was the list of contracts. Current clients that Royal Events supplied for, including several major ones that had clauses requiring vendors to maintain certain financial standards. Contracts that would be null and void once those clients found out about the debt situation, including, and this was my favorite part, the Vanderbilt wedding she'd been bragging about all night. Bianca's face went through about 17 different colors as she flipped through the pages, none of them healthy. Todd had one hand over his mouth like he was physically trying to keep himself from throwing up. The Vanderbilt wedding, Bianca whispered, her fingers stopping on that particular page. You can't. They signed a contract. With Royal Events as your primary supplier, I confirmed. And Royal Events' new ownership has decided, after reviewing the outstanding debt and the account history, that we can no longer extend credit to your company, which means you can't fulfill that contract. Which means, if I'm reading the fine print correctly, you're liable for breach of contract. That's going to be expensive, though probably not as expensive as the $200,000 you already owe. Her hand flew to her mouth. A sob escaped, quickly stifled, but it was there. Real tears started forming in her eyes, and part of me, a very small part that still remembered when she used to be almost nice to me before she decided I wasn't worth basic human respect, almost felt guilty. Almost. You might want to review all of that before your accountant does. I continued, my voice still maddeningly calm. Oh wait. I paused for dramatic effect, because I'd earned this moment. He works for me now. Small world, isn't it? Jerry came over to Meridian Holdings about 2 months ago. Better benefits package, better salary, and he gets to work on actual professional accounts instead of trying to make your creative mathematics look legitimate on paper. That did it. Bianca made this sound that was half sob, half scream, pushed back from the table with enough force that her chair screeched against the floor, and basically fled from the room. Todd scrambled after her, nearly tripping over his own feet, his multiple Rolexes jangling like some kind of expensive wind chimes marking the rhythm of their exit. The silence that followed their departure was somehow even worse than before. Matilda had been watching this entire exchange with increasing horror, her perfectly composed face finally cracking to show actual emotion underneath. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, her hands gripping her napkin so hard her knuckles had gone white. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold enough to flash freeze nitrogen. You ruined her, she said, each word precise and sharp as a scalpel. You deliberately, systematically ruined your own family member. Your wife's sister. Over what? Hurt feelings? Wounded pride? A plate of pasta? I looked at Matilda, really looked at her, and saw exactly what I'd been dealing with for 3 years. A woman so convinced of her own superiority, so certain that her family's wealth and status made them untouchable, that she couldn't comprehend the basic concept of consequences. I didn't ruin Bianca, I said, and my voice was steel wrapped in velvet. Bianca ruined herself by running a fraudulent business operation and treating people like they were beneath her. I just stopped paying for her mistakes. There's a difference. Semantics. Matilda spat. You're destroying this family. No. I countered, standing up slowly, deliberately. I'm just refusing to be the foundation you all stand on while you kick me. You can't build an empire on someone's back and then act surprised when they eventually stand up. Zara grabbed my arm, her nails digging in through my jacket sleeve. Her face was a mess of emotions. Anger, confusion, fear, and something that might have been realization finally dawning. Mason, stop. Just stop. You've made your point, okay? You're not the poor loser we all thought you were. Congratulations. Can we go home and talk about this like adults? I looked down at her hand on my arm, then up at her face. Like adults. I repeated slowly. Zara, adults don't serve their family members leftover pasta while everyone else eats steak. Adults don't mock their spouses in public. Adults don't spend 3 years treating someone like they're lucky to be tolerated instead of loved. I gently removed her hand from my arm. You wanted to see what I was capable of, I said quietly. You wanted to know if I had any backbone, any power, anything that made me worth respecting. Well, now you know. I bought the table you tried to push me away from. And you know what the really sad part is? I didn't do any of this because I wanted to hurt you. I did it because I was tired of letting you hurt me. Dean found his voice again, though it came out weak and uncertain. So what now? You're just going to bankrupt Bianca and walk away? Destroy the family and act like you're the victim? The family destroyed itself, I said, sliding a business card across the table toward him. This is the contact information for Meridian Holdings restructuring department. If Bianca wants to work out a payment plan, if she wants to actually run her business legitimately instead of like a Ponzi scheme with canapes, she can call them. They'll help her. That's what we do. We fix broken businesses. But she has to actually want to fix it, and she has to stop pretending that debt doesn't count if you smile pretty and know the right people. I looked around the table one last time. At Matilda, still clutching her napkin like a life preserver. At Dean, looking lost and confused. At Zara, tears finally starting to stream down her carefully made-up face. At the empty seats where Bianca and Todd had been. Enjoy the rest of your evening, I said. The meal's paid for. The wine's excellent. And unlike some people, I actually tip well, so the staff will take good care of you. Then I adjusted my tie, nodded to Eduardo, who'd been standing in the corner watching this entire disaster unfold with the fascinated horror of someone watching a nature documentary about predators, and walked toward the door. I didn't get far before Eduardo caught up with me in the hallway, just outside the Bordeaux room where my former family, and yeah, I was already thinking of them in past tense, was probably having a collective meltdown over their creme brulee. The man was grinning like he'd just witnessed the greatest performance of his life, which, to be fair, he probably had. That, Eduardo said, clasping his hands together, was magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. The staff is going to be talking about this for years. Maria is literally in the kitchen right now saying she wants to name a dish after you. I think she's calling it The Reckoning, and it's going to involve very expensive ingredients and a side of justified spite. I couldn't help but laugh. Real laughter, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest when tension finally releases after being wound tight for way too long. Tell Maria she's a genius and I love her. Also, make sure everyone who worked tonight gets a bonus. They earned it dealing with that circus. Already done, Eduardo confirmed. I added 20% to the corporate tab under staff appreciation. Consider it handled. He paused, his expression shifting to something more serious. You okay, though? That was intense. Even for family drama, that was next level. Was I okay? Honestly, I felt better than I had in 3 years. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying around this massive weight made of other people's expectations and judgments, and I'd finally just set it down and walked away. My shoulders didn't hurt anymore. My jaw wasn't clenched. I could actually breathe without feeling like I was suffocating on swallowed words and suppressed anger. I'm good, I said, and meant it. Really good, actually. Better than good. I feel like I just got paroled from a prison sentence I didn't deserve in the first place. Eduardo nodded, understanding in his eyes. You need anything else tonight? A drink? A quiet place to decompress? A getaway car? I'm good, I assured him. But I should probably check on the kids before I head out. Make sure they're not traumatized by all the adult drama happening around them. They're in the private garden area, Eduardo said, gesturing down a side hallway. We moved them there after dessert so they could run around without bothering other guests. Fair warning, though, they're completely sugar high from all that chocolate lava cake. It's like a tiny tornado convention out there. Perfect. Kids hopped up on premium chocolate sounded way better than dealing with adults having emotional breakdowns over their own bad decisions. The garden area was one of Le Chateau Noir's hidden gems, a courtyard tucked behind the main building, strung with fairy lights, and filled with the kind of elegant landscaping that cost more to maintain than most people's cars. It was quieter out here, peaceful, just the sound of water from a fountain and kids laughing as they chased each other around like caffeinated butterflies. Tyler spotted me first. The kid's face lit up like I'd just announced Christmas was happening twice this year. And he came running over with chocolate still smeared on his face and his dress shirt somehow already untucked despite the dinner ending only 20 minutes ago. "Uncle Mason," he shouted, because 8-year-olds only have one volume setting and it's loud enough to alert neighboring counties. "That was the best dessert ever. Did you see how the chocolate just exploded out when you cut it? It was like a volcano, a delicious volcano." I knelt down to his level, grinning at his enthusiasm. "Pretty cool, right? Better than chicken fingers." "So much better," Tyler confirmed solemnly, like he was delivering testimony in court. "Uncle Mason, are you magic? Because my mom said you couldn't afford nice things, but then you got us all that amazing food, and now I'm confused about who's telling the truth." Out of the mouths of babes, as they say, kids have this brutal honesty that adults spend years learning to suppress. They just say what they're thinking, consequences be damned. "Not magic, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Just good at my job. And here's a secret." I leaned in like I was sharing classified information. When people tell you that you can't do something, sometimes they're really just telling you about their own limitations, not yours. You remember that, okay? Tyler nodded seriously, processing this wisdom with the gravity it deserved. Then his face split into another chocolate-smeared grin. "My mom says you made Aunt Bianca cry. Did you really?" Oh boy. Of course the kids had heard about that. In families like this, drama traveled faster than sound. "Your Aunt Bianca got some news about her business that she wasn't happy about?" I said carefully, trying to navigate the minefield of explaining adult consequences to a child. Sometimes when you run a company, you have to make hard decisions. And sometimes those decisions make people sad. But that doesn't mean they're wrong decisions. "My dad says you're mean," Tyler continued, "because apparently we were just airing all the family laundry now. But I don't think you're mean. I mean, people don't give kids extra dessert. You gave me extra dessert. That makes you nice." Simple logic. Beautiful, uncomplicated, 8-year-old logic that cut through all the corporate speak and family politics and just got to the heart of things. I'd shown kindness to the kids, therefore I wasn't the villain. If only the adults could think that clearly. "Thanks, champ," I said, genuinely touched. "You're a good kid. Don't ever let anyone treat you like you don't matter, okay? And definitely don't ever treat other people like they don't matter. That's the important part." "Because everyone matters?" Tyler asked. "Exactly. Everyone matters. Even the boring accountants." Tyler laughed like I'd told the funniest joke in the world, then ran off to rejoin his cousins who were trying to catch fireflies near the fountain. I stood up, brushing off my knees, and that's when I heard her voice behind me. That was quite a speech. Zara. Of course. The woman had radar for dramatic moments she could insert herself into. I turned around slowly. She was standing in the garden doorway, still in her designer dress that probably cost more than my first car, mascara slightly smeared from crying, looking both furious and lost at the same time. Her arms were crossed defensively, but her posture was all wrong. Slumped shoulders, uncertain stance. This wasn't the confident woman who'd mocked me an hour ago. This was someone whose entire worldview had just been forcibly rearranged. "We need to talk," she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Do we?" I asked, not unkindly, just genuinely curious about what she thought there was left to say. "Mason, you destroyed my sister's business. You humiliated my entire family. You made my mother look foolish in front of everyone. And you did it all so coldly, so calculated, like you'd been planning this for months." 6 months, actually. I corrected, because accuracy matters. "Well, technically 3 years if you count all the times I took notes on how your family treated me and decided that eventually there would be consequences." "This isn't you," Zara insisted, taking a step closer. "The Mason I married wouldn't do something like this. He wouldn't be this cruel, this vindictive." I looked at my wife who'd sat there and watched her sister serve me leftover pasta, who'd told me I should sit at the kids' table, who'd spent 3 years allowing her family to treat me like I was lucky they tolerated my existence. and I felt a profound sense of sadness mixed with relief. You're right, I said quietly. The Mason you married wouldn't have done this. But that Mason doesn't exist anymore. You know why? Because that Mason kept thinking that if he just stayed quiet enough, worked hard enough, proved himself enough, eventually your family would see his worth. That Mason was an idiot. So you planned this whole revenge scheme? Over what, pasta? Hurt pride. Over basic human dignity, I corrected. Over 3 years of being treated like I was worthless. Over watching you sit there time and time again and say nothing while your family mocked me. Over being served leftovers at a birthday dinner like I was a stray dog they were doing a favor by feeding. It wasn't about the pasta, Zara. It was about what the pasta represented, your entire family's contempt for me, and your complicity in it. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Opened it again. I didn't think it was that bad. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think it was bad at all. You thought it was normal. Acceptable. Just how your family is. But here's the thing about being someone's partner. You're supposed to have their back. You're supposed to defend them. You're supposed to make it clear that disrespecting your spouse isn't acceptable, even if it's coming from your own family. Especially if it's coming from your own family. Zara's eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't tell if they were tears of genuine remorse or just tears of someone upset that their comfortable situation had been disrupted. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. I thought about that question. Really thought about it. What had happened now? Did I go home to our apartment and pretend this dinner hadn't been a turning point? Did I try to rebuild a marriage that might have been built on shaky ground from the start? Did I give her another chance to prove she could choose me over her family's toxic dynamics? Honestly, I said, I don't know, but I know that I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done making myself smaller so other people can feel bigger. I'm done being the joke at family dinners. If you can't respect me, if your family can't respect me, then maybe we need to rethink what we're doing here. Before she could respond, Tyler came running back over, completely oblivious to the heavy conversation happening. Uncle Mason, Sophie says fireflies aren't actually made of fire, but I think she's wrong. Can you tell her? I smiled at him, grateful for the interruption. Sophie's right, buddy. They're bioluminescent. It's a chemical reaction, not actual fire. Way cooler than fire, actually, because it doesn't burn anything. Whoa. Tyler breathed, his mind appropriately blown. I turned back to Zara one last time. You know what the real difference is between your family and me? They think you can order respect from a menu, that it comes automatically with money and status and the right last name. But respect? You can't buy it. You can't inherit it. You have to earn it. And sweetheart. I paused, letting the word hang there with all its bitter irony. Your family never earned mine. Then I reached into my wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and handed it to Tyler. Take all your cousins for ice cream on the way home, okay? The real good stuff. Life's too short for cheap dessert. I walked past Zara, past the fairy lights and the fountain, past the expensive landscaping and the illusion of perfection that places like this tried so hard to maintain. Eduardo was waiting by the front entrance with my coat and a knowing smile. Heading out, he asked. Yeah, I said, shrugging into my jacket. I think my work here is done. The tab's all settled. Tipped the staff generously too, just like you asked. Perfect. I paused at the door, looking back one last time at Le Chateau Noir, at the restaurant that had been the stage for probably the most satisfying dinner of my life. Thanks for everything tonight, Eduardo. Seriously. Anytime, he said. And Mason, that family of yours, they never deserved you. I stepped out into the cool night air, pulling out my phone to call an Uber, and smiled. He was right. They never did. My wife screamed, "You're a worthless loser," during an argument in front of her friends. I said, "You know what? You're right." Then I quit being her loser. What her friends told her after I left the party. So here's the thing about turning 34 when you're married to someone like Clarissa. It's less of a birthday and more of a production worthy of a Broadway stage, complete with an audience that showed up exclusively to judge the set design and talk trash about the director during intermission. My wife, bless her meticulously filtered heart, had been planning this party for approximately 3 months, which is roughly the same amount of time most people spend planning actual weddings. But this wasn't just any party. No, this was Clarissa's moment to prove to her BMW driving, latte sipping, I summer in the Hamptons crew that she had successfully adult her way into relevance. I spent the entire Saturday transforming our apartment into what can only be described as if Pinterest and Instagram had a baby, and that baby threw up all over our living room. We're talking balloon arches in rose gold, string lights that probably cost more than my first car, and enough eucalyptus garlands to make a koala bear weep with joy. The catering alone could have fed a small village, but instead, we had 30 of Clarissa's closest frenemies picking at sushi rolls like they were defusing bombs. And yes, she hired a bartender, an actual human being whose sole job for the evening was to make cocktails with names like Millennial Pink Dream and Basic, but make it classy. I'm pretty sure I saw him die a little inside every time someone asked if the vodka was organic. My role in this extravaganza? I was basically the event coordinator, the cleanup crew, and the guy who made sure the ice bucket stayed full while Clarissa floated around in a dress that cost more than 2 months of groceries, accepting compliments like she was collecting Pokemon cards. Every time someone new arrived, she'd do this thing where she'd squeal, hug them like they'd just returned from war, and then immediately start comparing engagement rings or talking about some boutique in Soho that only accepts customers by appointment. It was exhausting just watching it, and I was the poor sucker who'd been setting up since 9 in the morning. But here's where the evening took a turn from mildly annoying to you've got to be kidding me. Around the third round of craft cocktails, when everyone was sufficiently buzzed and the truth serum known as alcohol had kicked in, Clarissa introduced me to some new arrivals. And I quote, "Oh, this is Marcus. He's the guy who fixes air conditioners. Not my husband. Not the man who pays for this apartment and everything in it. Not even the person who spent his entire day making this party possible. Nope. I was demoted to the guy who fixes air conditioners, delivered with the same enthusiasm you'd use to describe someone who cleans porta potties at music festivals." I smiled, nodded, shook hands with some dude named Brent who definitely wears boat shoes without socks and calls his dad Pops. Then I retreated to the kitchen to restock the ice because apparently rich people go through frozen water faster than normal humans. That's when I heard it. Clarissa was holding court near the hors d'oeuvres table, surrounded by her usual suspects. Megan, who married a guy with a trust fund and never lets anyone forget it. Ashley, her sister who works in marketing but mostly just posts on social media. And Jennifer, whose entire personality is her Peloton stats. "So where are you guys going for vacation this year?" Megan asked, twirling her wine glass like she was in a commercial for sophistication. Clarissa sighed, and I could hear the eye roll from across the room. "We're not going anywhere. Marcus can't afford it." "Excuse me? I'm sorry, did I just hear that correctly?" The guy who's been busting his back working overtime, the guy whose name is on the lease, the guy who literally makes it possible for you to live in an apartment that doesn't require you to share a bathroom with strangers. That guy can't afford a vacation? I stood there holding a bag of ice like it was the only thing tethering me to reality, feeling my blood pressure spike to levels that probably violated some kind of medical safety standard. Jennifer, ever the helpful friend, chimed in with, "Oh no, that's rough. We're doing 2 weeks in Turks and Caicos." I mentioned camping. Clarissa continued, her voice dripping with the kind of disdain usually reserved for describing contagious diseases. "Like, we could go to some state park or whatever." I walked over, still holding the ice like a weapon I wasn't allowed to use. Actually, I thought camping could be fun. You know, disconnect from technology, enjoy nature, spend some quality time together. The look she gave me could have curdled milk. She rolled her eyes so hard I'm pretty sure she saw her own brain. And then she said it. "Camping? Seriously, Marcus?" I said Cabo, not mosquito bites and porta potties. "What are we, broke college students?" Her friends laughed. Actually laughed. Like I'd just performed a comedy routine instead of suggesting a perfectly reasonable vacation option. Megan snorted wine through her nose. Ashley literally slapped her knee. And Jennifer looked at me with pity, as if I'd just admitted I still used a flip phone and thought MySpace was making a comeback. But Clarissa wasn't done. Oh no, she was just warming up for her grand finale. She took a long sip of her wine, set the glass down with the kind of dramatic pause that would make soap opera actors jealous, and then she looked at me with those eyes that used to make me feel loved, but now just made me feel small. And she said, loud enough for everyone in the apartment to hear, loud enough that even the bartenders stopped mid-pour. "You know what, Marcus? You're a worthless loser." The entire room went silent. Like, You could hear a pin drop, a heartbeat, the sound of my dignity packing its bags. Someone's phone buzzed, and it sounded like a foghorn. She kept going, because why stop at devastating when you can go for absolutely soul-crushing? You fix air conditioners for a living. How embarrassing is that? My friends have husbands who are doctors, lawyers, investors. And I have a guy who crawls around in attics and comes home smelling like Freon. 30 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Some were shocked. Some were amused. Some looked away, suddenly very interested in the balloon arch. But they all saw it. They all heard it. And in that moment, I had a choice. I could get angry. I could yell back. I could defend myself and tell everyone in that room that I work 60-hour weeks, that I'm skilled at something most people can't do, that I've kept this household running while she spent money on birthday parties and bottomless brunches. But instead, I smiled. Not a fake smile, not a bitter smile, but a genuine, peaceful smile. I straightened my shirt, set down the bag of ice, and said, "You know what, Clarissa? You're absolutely right." She blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. "What? You're right. I am a worthless loser. At least, that's what I am to you. And you know what? I'm done being that person." I looked around the room at all those faces, the same people who'd eaten our food, drunk our booze, enjoyed our hospitality, and I gave them a little nod. "Enjoy the party, everyone. The loser's going to see himself out." And I walked straight to the bedroom, grabbed my keys, my wallet, and a jacket. Clarissa followed me, suddenly panicked, suddenly realizing maybe she'd taken it too far. "Marcus, wait. I didn't mean." "Yeah, you did," I said calmly. Not angry, not hurt, just done. "You meant every word. And honestly, thank you. Because now I know exactly where I stand." I didn't slam the door, didn't make a scene, just walked out of that apartment, down the stairs, and out into the cool night air where I could finally breathe without choking on the smell of overpriced candles and toxic relationships. Behind me, I could hear the party continuing, the music still playing, people awkwardly trying to restart conversations after witnessing a marriage implode in real time. And you know what? For the first time in years, I felt free. Trevor's apartment smelled like a combination of pepperoni pizza, old sneakers, and freedom. Glorious, beautiful freedom. When I showed up at his door at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night, still wearing my party setup clothes and probably looking like I'd just survived some kind of emotional warfare, he took one look at my face and didn't ask a single question. That's the thing about real friends. They have this sixth sense about when you need an interrogation and when you just need a couch and silence. Trevor, bless his emotionally intelligent heart, went straight for option 2. He opened the door wider, stepped aside, and said exactly 3 words: "Bedroom or couch?" "Couch," I replied, because the last thing I needed was to feel like I was imposing on his personal space more than I already was by showing up unannounced with my marriage in a body bag. He nodded, disappeared into the kitchen, and returned 30 seconds later with 2 cold beers, a bag of tortilla chips that was already half empty, and the TV remote, which he placed in my hand like he was passing me the Olympic torch. "Beer's cold. Couch is yours. Remote's got fresh batteries. I'm gonna be in my room playing video games with headphones on. So holler if you need anything or if, you want to talk about whatever the hell happened tonight." "Thanks, man," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my exhausted being. He gave me a fist bump, because Trevor's 32 years old and still communicates through gestures that peaked in 2008 and vanished into his bedroom. I heard the door click shut, and then it was just me, a beat-up leather couch that had definitely seen better days, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I cracked open the beer, took a long drink, and finally let myself process what had just happened. My wife of 4 years had called me a worthless loser in front of 30 people. I'd walked out, and now I was sitting on my buddy's couch at 11:30 on a Saturday night, watching some late-night talk show host make jokes about politicians while I contemplated whether my marriage had been circling the drain for months or if it had just spontaneously combusted in spectacular fashion. I didn't cry, if that's what you're wondering. I wasn't sad exactly. I was more like relieved. Like when you finally pull off a Band-Aid that's been stuck to your arm for way too long, and yeah, it hurts for a second, but then you realize your skin can finally breathe again. That's what this felt like. Like I could finally breathe without worrying about whether Clarissa would criticize the way I was inhaling oxygen. I must have fallen asleep around 2 in the morning because the next thing I knew, sunlight was stabbing me in the eyeballs through Trevor's blinds that didn't quite close all the way, and my neck felt like I'd spent the night wrestling an alligator instead of sleeping on a couch. I reached for my phone to check the time and nearly dropped it when I saw the screen. 62 missed calls. 62. I had to count them twice because surely that number was a glitch in the matrix, right? Wrong. All from Clarissa, starting around midnight and continuing well into the early morning hours, the most recent one being at 6:47 a.m., which meant she'd either not slept at all or had woken up early to continue her campaign of trying to reach me. But wait, there's more. Because the missed calls were just the appetizer. The text messages were the main course, and boy oh boy, was it a feast of emotional whiplash. I scrolled through them with the kind of morbid fascination you have when you're watching a car crash in slow motion. The first few, sent around midnight, were pretty standard post-fight panic texts. Baby, where are you? And come home, we need to talk. And I'm worried about you. Okay, fine. Normal stuff. But then, as the night progressed and I didn't respond, the messages started evolving like some kind of Pokemon of psychological manipulation. 1:30 a.m. I was drunk, okay? I didn't mean what I said. 2:15 a.m. Marcus, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a child. 3:03 a.m. Fine. Be that way. See if I care. 3:47 a.m. I can't believe you left me at my own birthday party. Do you know how humiliating that was? Wait, hold up. Let me get this straight. I was the humiliating one, not the person who verbally demolished their spouse in front of a crowd of people who were probably texting about it in their group chats before the party even ended. The mental gymnastics required to reach that conclusion deserved an Olympic gold medal. 4:32 a.m. My friends think you're abusive now. You just walked out and abandoned me. And there it was. The classic move. When you can't defend your own behavior, flip the script and become the victim. I'm abusive because I left after being called worthless? That's like saying the fire is abusive to the house it's burning down. The logic was so backwards it could have won a limbo contest. 5:51 a.m. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. 6:47 a.m. If you don't come home right now, I'm calling your mother. Oh, the mother card. Because nothing says mature adult relationship like threatening to tattle to someone's mom. I read through the entire saga twice, drinking it in like it was some kind of dramatic Netflix series, except this was my actual life, and I was somehow both the protagonist and the guy getting terrible reviews. Trevor emerged from his bedroom around 9, looking like he'd actually slept well, which made one of us. He took one look at me sitting on his couch, phone in hand, expression probably somewhere between bewildered and exhausted, and said, "She's been texting, hasn't she?" 62 calls and about 40 texts. I replied, still scrolling through the greatest hits of Clarissa's overnight emotional journey. Yikes, he said, heading to the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. What's the vibe? Apologetic or defensive? It's like reading a novel called The Many Moods of Clarissa. We've got regret, anger, victimhood, threats, guilt tripping, and something that I think was supposed to be gaslighting but came across more like a drunk person trying to explain quantum physics. Trevor laughed, pouring coffee into 2 mugs that definitely didn't match and probably hadn't been washed as thoroughly as they should have been, but I wasn't about to complain. You gonna respond? I thought about it for a minute, taking the coffee he offered and letting the warmth seep into my hands. Part of me wanted to write out this long, detailed response explaining exactly why what she'd said was messed up, why I'd left, why I deserved basic respect from my own wife. But then I realized something. People who don't respect you when you're standing right in front of them aren't suddenly going to have an epiphany because you sent them a well-crafted text message. You can't logic someone into treating you better. You can't explain your way into their empathy. Either they get it or they don't, and Clarissa had made it pretty clear last night that she didn't. So instead, I typed out one single message. Short, simple, and to the point. You're right. I was a worthless loser. Working on that now. Your stuff will be packed by Friday. I hit send before I could second-guess myself, and then I watched as the little delivered notification appeared under my message. Approximately 15 seconds later, my phone started ringing. Clarissa's name lit up the screen like a warning sign on a highway. I stared at it for a moment, watching it buzz and vibrate in my hand, and then I did something that felt absolutely radical. I let it ring. I didn't answer. I didn't decline the call. I just let it ring and ring until it went to voicemail. And then I set the phone face down on the coffee table and took a long sip of Trevor's mediocre coffee. That felt good, didn't it? Trevor asked, grinning like he'd just watched me win a championship. You have no idea, I said, and for the first time since walking out of that party, I actually smiled. Because silence, it turns out, is the sound of self-respect. And after 4 years of noise, I was ready to enjoy the quiet. Monday morning hit different. I woke up on Trevor's couch with a crick in my neck that felt like someone had replaced my cervical spine with a rusty slinky, but my brain was clearer than it had been in months. Maybe years. You know that feeling when you've been walking around with a pebble in your shoe for so long that you forget it's even there, and then one day you finally take it out, and suddenly you remember what it's like to walk normally? That's what this felt like. Except the pebble was a whole entire marriage, and taking it out involved walking away from a birthday party like I was in some kind of indie movie about self-discovery. I made coffee in Trevor's kitchen, which was an adventure in itself because his coffee maker looked like it had survived several natural disasters and possibly a small war, and sat at his wobbly kitchen table with a legal pad I'd found in my truck and a pen that barely worked. And that's when the idea hit me. Actually, let me rephrase that. That's when Clarissa's words from Saturday night came back to haunt her in the most spectacular way possible. She'd called me a worthless loser who fixes air conditioners for a living, right? Like that was supposed to be an insult? Like having a skilled trade that people actually need and will pay good money for is somehow embarrassing? Well, here's the thing about being called worthless. It either destroys you or it becomes the best motivation you've ever had. And I was done being destroyed. So I decided to test a theory. Can a worthless loser start his own HVAC company? Spoiler alert. Yes, he absolutely can. And he can do it before lunchtime on a Monday too. By 9 a.m., I was on my laptop researching business licenses, LLC formations, and everything I needed to know about going independent. Turns out, the internet is full of information when you're actually motivated to look for it instead of spending your evenings watching your wife scroll through Instagram and sigh dramatically because some influencer she's never met bought a new handbag. I filled out forms, read through legal requirements, and started making a checklist of everything I'd need to get this operation off the ground. Business license? Check. Insurance? Yep, gonna need that. Bank account? Definitely. A name that would make me smile every single time I said it? Oh, absolutely. By 10:30, I was on the phone with the county clerk's office, asking questions about business registration and trying not to laugh when the woman on the other end asked me what I wanted to name my company. Because I'd already decided, sitting there at Trevor's kitchen table with my terrible coffee and my barely working pen, exactly what this company was going to be called. MNC Climate Systems. Professional, right? Sounds legit. Sounds like a company that knows what it's doing. But here's the kicker. MNC doesn't stand for Marcus and Climate or anything boring like that. Nope. MNC stands for Move On, Clarissa. I told Trevor during his lunch break, catching him between bites of a sandwich that appeared to be mostly mayonnaise and regret. He stopped mid-chew, stared at me for approximately 5 seconds, and then laughed so hard he actually snorted and had to put his sandwich down to avoid choking. Dude, he said, wiping tears from his eyes. That's the most petty and amazing thing I've ever heard. You're naming your entire business as a message to your ex-wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife. I corrected, because accuracy matters. And yeah, I am. Every time I answer the phone, every time I write an invoice, every time I see that name on my truck, I'm going to remember that I'm moving forward and she's not invited. That's cold, man. I love it, Trevor said, raising his mostly mayonnaise sandwich in a toast. To MNC Climate Systems. May your business be successful and your ex-wife be forever confused about whether those initials are about her. By noon, I had filed for my business license online, paid the fees that made my checking account weep a little, but nothing I couldn't recover from, and started designing a logo. Now, I'm not a graphic designer, and my artistic skills peak at stick figures and maybe a decent-looking house if I'm really concentrating. But thank God for websites that let you create logos even if you have the design sense of a potato. I played around with different fonts, colors, and layouts until I had something that looked professional without screaming. I made this in my buddy's kitchen while having an emotional crisis. The logo was clean, blue and white, because those are trustworthy colors that say we know what we're doing with your expensive HVAC system, with M&C in bold letters and climate systems underneath in a smaller, sleeker font. I added a little snowflake and sun icon because symbolism or whatever, and boom. I had a logo that didn't look like a midlife crisis, which was more than I could say for some of the business cards I'd seen from other contractors over the years. But here's where it gets really good. See, I'd been working for the same HVAC company for 6 years, and in that time, I'd built up a pretty solid reputation. I was the guy people requested by name. I was the one who showed up on time, explained things in normal human language instead of technical jargon designed to make people feel stupid, and actually fixed problems instead of just selling people stuff they didn't need. And over those 6 years, I'd had probably a dozen clients tell me, "Marcus, if you ever go independent, you call me first. I'll hire you in a heartbeat." So that's exactly what I did. I started making calls. I reached out to the people who'd given me their personal numbers, the ones who'd tipped me extra at Christmas, the ones who'd said they wished they could just hire me directly instead of going through the company. And you know what? Every single one of them was interested. Mrs. Patterson, who had a beach house that needed a new system installed. "Oh, Marcus, absolutely. When can you start?" The Hendersons, whose AC unit I'd been maintaining for 4 years. "We were just talking about how we wished we could have you instead of whoever the company sends." "Yes, sign us up." By Wednesday afternoon, I had a business checking account set up at the credit union down the street from Trevor's place. The woman who helped me, whose name tag said Patricia, and who had the energy of someone's cool aunt who's really into crafts, was extremely enthusiastic about my business plan. "My husband and I need our furnace looked at before winter," she said, sliding me her business card. "Call me when you're ready to take appointments." I had my first potential client before I even left the bank. The universe, it seemed, was on my side for once. I also had 3 service calls lined up for the following week, a maintenance check, a repair job, and a consultation for a complete system replacement. That last one was potentially a $15,000 job if I could get it, which would be enough to cover my startup costs, and then some. I spent Wednesday evening pricing out tools I'd need to buy, making lists, and feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time, excited about my own life. Meanwhile, back in the land of filtered selfies and manufactured drama, Clarissa was still texting. The messages had evolved from angry to confused to slightly threatening. "You'll regret this," one said. "You're making a huge mistake," said another. "We can fix this if you just come home and talk to me like an adult," said a third, which was rich coming from the woman who'd chosen a birthday party as the venue to air her grievances about my career choices. I didn't respond to any of them, not because I was playing games or trying to punish her, but because there was literally nothing left to say. She'd made it clear how she felt about me, and I'd made it clear that I wasn't going to stick around to be her punching bag anymore. The conversation was over. The relationship was over. And honestly, I was too busy building something new to waste time defending myself to someone who'd already decided I wasn't worth defending. Trevor came home from work that evening to find me surrounded by paperwork, laptop open, legal pad covered in notes and calculations, looking like a beautiful disaster of productivity and determination. "How's the empire building going?" he asked, dropping his keys on the counter. "Pretty good," I said, looking up from a spreadsheet I'd been working on. "I've got 3 clients lined up, a logo that doesn't suck, and a business name that makes me smile every time I think about it." "And Clarissa?" I shrugged. "Still texting. Still thinks I'll regret this." Trevor grinned. "Will you?" I looked at my laptop screen, at the M&C Climate Systems logo I'd created, at the list of potential clients, and the future I was building one decision at a time. "The only thing I regret," I said, "is not doing this sooner." Thursday afternoon, I was sitting on Trevor's couch doing paperwork for my new business and eating leftover Chinese food straight from the container like a functional adult when my phone buzzed with a text from our apartment building's doorman, Miguel. "Hey man, your wife is on her way up. Thought you'd want a heads up." I'd texted him earlier in the week to let him know I'd moved out temporarily and to give him Trevor's address in case anything important came up. Miguel was good people. He'd seen enough domestic drama in his 15 years working that building to write a book, and he had this sixth sense about when to warn somebody that chaos was incoming. I barely had time to set down my lo mein before there was a knock on Trevor's door. Not a normal knock, either. This was the kind of knock that had emotion behind it. Urgent, demanding, The knock of someone who'd rehearsed a whole speech in their car and was ready to perform it whether you wanted to hear it or not. I looked through the peephole, and there she was. Clarissa, looking like she'd stepped out of a makeup tutorial about the natural crying look, complete with mascara that was strategically smudged, but not too smudged, you know what I mean? This was calculated sadness, the kind you see in music videos about heartbreak. I opened the door, and she immediately launched into what I can only describe as a telenovela audition. "Marcus, please," she said, and her voice had that little crack in it that was supposed to make my heart melt, but instead just made me tired. "You're throwing away 4 years. 4 years of our lives together. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I leaned against the doorframe, crossed my arms, and took a deep breath before responding. "No, Clarissa, I'm not throwing away 4 years. I'm walking away from 4 years of being ashamed of myself. There's a difference." She blinked at me like I'd just started speaking ancient Greek. "What are you talking about? I was never ashamed of you." "Really?" I said, and I could feel my voice getting calmer even as the frustration was building inside my chest. "You weren't ashamed when you introduced me as the guy who fixes air conditioners instead of your husband? You weren't ashamed when you told your friends I couldn't afford a vacation? You weren't ashamed when you looked me in the eye at your birthday party and called me a worthless loser in front of 30 people? "I was drunk," she protested, and there it was, the excuse I'd been waiting for. The classic, "I was drunk so it doesn't count" defense, as if alcohol just magically creates opinions that don't exist in your sober brain. Newsflash, drunk words are sober thoughts with the filter turned off. "Then maybe you should examine what kind of person you become when you drink," I said. Because drunk Clarissa and sober Clarissa seem to have the same opinion about me, and honestly, I'm done trying to figure out which one is the real you. She switched tactics then, like she was scrolling through a menu of manipulation techniques, trying to find one that would work. The tears started flowing a little harder, still controlled, still camera ready, but with more volume. "I just wanted more for us, Marcus. I wanted us to have nice things, to go nice places. Is that so wrong? Is it wrong to have ambition?" "Having ambition isn't wrong," I said, and I meant it. But spending every single dinner, every conversation, every quiet moment trying to turn me into someone else, that's not ambition, Clarissa. That's just mean. You didn't fall in love with some investment banker or tech bro or whatever fantasy guy you've got in your head. You married a guy who fixes air conditioners. And if that's not good enough for you, if I'm not good enough for you, then why the hell did you marry me in the first place?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, mouth slightly open, tears still perfectly positioned on her cheeks like they were waiting for their close-up. So I continued, because apparently 4 years of holding my tongue had created a backlog of things I needed to say. "Every time we went out with your friends, you'd find some way to diminish what I do. Every time someone asked about my work, you'd change the subject or make some joke about me being handy around the house, like I was a glorified maintenance man instead of a skilled professional. You wanted me to dress differently, talk differently, have different hobbies, different friends. You wanted me to order salads and say words like networking and synergy without irony. You wanted me to be someone I'm not, and I'm sorry, but I'm done apologizing for being myself." That's when she pulled out what I call the legal threat card, which is what people do when they realize that emotional manipulation isn't working and they need to try a different angle. She straightened up, wiped her tears with the back of her hand in a gesture that was probably supposed to look strong and determined, and said, "You know what? Fine. But I've lived in that apartment for 2 years. I have rights, Marcus. You can't just kick me out." I almost laughed. Actually, I did laugh, just a little bit, which made her face go red in that way it does when she's really angry but trying to maintain composure. "Rights," I said. "Clarissa, your name isn't on the lease. You don't pay rent. You don't pay utilities. You don't pay for groceries unless you count buying organic almond milk once a month as contributing. You're not a tenant. You're a guest. You're my guest, actually, which is why I've been so generous about letting you live rent-free in my apartment while you spent your salary on birthday parties and brunch." "That's not fair," she said, and her voice was getting higher now, losing some of that calculated control. "I contribute in other ways." "Like what?" I asked, genuinely curious. "What exactly do you contribute, Clarissa?" "Because I pay the rent. I pay the utilities. I buy the groceries. I do the cooking when we're not ordering takeout. I do most of the cleaning. I set up your entire birthday party while you were at the spa getting ready. So please, enlighten me. What are these mysterious other ways you contribute? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It was like watching a fish trying to breathe on land. Finally, she said, I make our home beautiful. You buy throw pillows, I corrected. Throw pillows that cost more than my truck payment and serve no functional purpose except to make the couch uncomfortable. That's not contribution, that's decoration. You're being cruel, she said. And now the tears were coming for real. Not the strategic ones from before, but actual tears of frustration and maybe, just maybe, the dawning realization that this wasn't going the way she'd planned. I'm being honest, I said. And honestly, Clarissa, we've been over for a while now. We've both known it. You just thought you could keep me around as your personal ATM and ego boost until someone better came along. Well, guess what? I'm the one who found someone better. Her eyes went wide. You're seeing someone? Yeah, I said. Myself. I'm seeing myself clearly for the first time in 4 years, and it turns out I actually like that guy. He's got ambition. He's got skills. He's starting his own business. He's pretty great, actually, and he deserves better than someone who thinks he's worthless. She tried one more time, reaching out to touch my arm in that way she used to do when we first started dating, when touching my arm meant something instead of just being a manipulation technique. Marcus, please, can we just talk about this? Really talk? Without all the anger and the accusations. I gently moved my arm away. There's nothing left to talk about, Clarissa. You said what you really think about me. I heard you. 30 other people heard you. And now I'm acting accordingly. Your stuff will be packed up by Friday. You can pick it up this weekend. Miguel will let you in. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, and there was real panic in her voice now. I don't know. Your mom's house? Ashley's place. One of your friends who has a husband successful enough to afford a guest room. The sarcasm was thick enough to spread on toast, but I couldn't help it. You'll figure it out. You're resourceful when you want to be. She stood there for another moment, trying to think of something else to say, some other angle to work, some way to turn this situation back in her favor. But I could see the moment she realized it wasn't going to work. Her shoulders slumped, her face crumpled, and she pulled out her phone, not to call someone for support, but to probably text her friends about what a monster I was being. This isn't over, she said, which is what people always say when something is definitely over and they just haven't accepted it yet. Yeah, it is, I said softly. It's been over. We just finally made it official. She turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator, her heels clicking against the floor in an angry rhythm. I watched her go, waited until I heard the elevator ding and the doors close, and then I went back inside Trevor's apartment and closed the door. My Chinese food was cold by then, but I didn't care. I heated it up in the microwave, sat back down on the couch, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Trevor came home about an hour later and found me watching some documentary about penguins, of all things, looking completely relaxed for the first time all week. She came by, didn't she? He asked, reading my expression. Yep, I said. And she left. For good this time. He grabbed a beer from the fridge, sat down next to me, and clinked his bottle against my container of reheated lo mein. To new beginnings, he said. To being done with old endings, I replied. And we sat there watching penguins waddle across Antarctica, and it was honestly the most at peace I'd felt in years. Saturday morning started peaceful enough. I was at the apartment, my apartment. Let me emphasize that, packing up Clarissa's stuff into boxes that I'd specifically bought for this purpose because I'm not a complete savage. I was actually being pretty respectful about it, carefully folding her clothes, wrapping her decorative nonsense in bubble wrap, labeling everything clearly. I even bought the nice boxes from U-Haul instead of just grabbing whatever was behind the liquor store like some kind of breakup amateur. I was halfway through her closet, wondering why anyone needs 17 pairs of black pants that all look identical, when I heard the knock on the door. I checked the peephole and immediately knew I was in trouble. Not just Clarissa trouble. Not even Clarissa and her sister trouble. No, this was the full arsenal. Standing in my hallway was an entire delegation of estrogen and opinions. Clarissa's mom, Diane, her sister, Ashley, and 3 of her best friends, including Megan, who always acts like she's married to a combination of George Clooney and Einstein and walks around with this permanent expression that suggests she smells something bad but is too polite to mention it. This was an intervention. A full-blown, coordinated, probably rehearsed in a group chat intervention. I opened the door because refusing to would have just meant they'd stand out there making a scene in the hallway, and Mrs. Patterson from 3B was already nosy enough without giving her premium entertainment. They filed in like they were entering a courtroom, and I swear I saw Ashley actually crack her knuckles like she was getting ready for a fight. The energy in the room shifted from man peacefully packing boxes to man on trial for crimes against committed relationships. Diane went first because of course she did. She's got that mom authority that makes you want to sit up straight and apologize for things you didn't even do. "Marcus," she said, and her voice had that disappointed teacher quality that probably worked great when Clarissa was 12, but wasn't quite landing the same way on her soon-to-be son-in-law. "Couples fight. All couples fight. You don't end a marriage over one argument." I set down the box I'd been packing and turned to face the firing squad. "Diane, with all due respect, it wasn't an argument. It was a public execution. There's a difference between fighting and being called a worthless loser in front of 30 people at a birthday party I spent all day setting up." One of the friends, I think her name was Jennifer, the Peloton one, jumped in with, "She was just venting. Women need to vent sometimes." "Venting is complaining about your day to your friends over wine," I said, keeping my voice calm even though I could feel my blood pressure starting to rise. What Clarissa did was verbal abuse with an audience. There's a pretty significant difference between those two things. Ashley, ever the loyal sister, crossed her arms and hit me with the excuse I'd been waiting for. "She was drunk, Marcus. People say things they don't mean when they're drunk." I couldn't help but laugh at that one. Then maybe she should examine her relationship with alcohol. Or better yet, maybe drunk Clarissa is just honest Clarissa without the filter. Either way, I heard what I needed to hear. That's when Megan decided to grace me with her wisdom. She actually scoffed, like an actual audible scoff, and said with this tone that could freeze lava, "You're being immature about this whole thing. Clarissa deserves better than someone who just runs away when things get tough." I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her. This woman who'd spent the last 2 years at every dinner party talking about her boyfriend's medical practice and their trips to Europe and their investment portfolio, like it was personality trait. And I smiled. Not a fake smile, not an angry smile, but a genuine smile that probably looked a little bit crazy given the circumstances. "You know what, Megan? You're absolutely right." She blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. They all looked a little confused, actually, like I'd just started speaking backwards. "Clarissa does deserve better," I continued. "She deserves someone who meets her standards, someone who makes enough money to impress her friends, someone who wears the right clothes and says the right things and orders the right items off the menu. Someone who's okay with being constantly reminded that they're not quite good enough, but they should keep trying anyway. And you're right, that's not me. That's never going to be me. So I'm setting her free to find that person." "You're welcome." The room went quiet for a second. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Someone's phone buzzed. And then Clarissa, who'd been standing slightly behind her mom this whole time like she was using Diane as a human shield, decided to pull out the nuclear option. "I'm pregnant," she said. Just like that. No build-up, no context, just dropped it like a bomb in the middle of the conversation. The other women gasped, actually gasped like they were in a soap opera. Ashley grabbed her sister's hand. Diane put her hand over her mouth. Megan looked at me like I'd just been revealed as a villain in a murder mystery. I crossed my arms and stared at Clarissa, really stared at her, and watched her face start to crack under the pressure of maintaining eye contact with someone who knew she was lying. "No, you're not," I said calmly. "Yes, I am," she insisted, her voice getting higher. "Clarissa, you're not pregnant. And I know you're not pregnant for several reasons. First, unless you conceived between margaritas last Tuesday, the timeline doesn't work because we haven't had sex in 6 weeks. Second, you literally just had your period 2 weeks ago. I know because you complained about it and made me go to CVS at midnight for tampons. And third, you're not pregnant because you would have led with that instead of bringing your entire cheer squad here to guilt trip me." Her face went from pale to red in about 3 seconds flat. Ashley looked at her sister with this expression of dawning horror, like she was realizing in real time that maybe she'd picked the wrong side of this fight. Even Diane looked skeptical now, her mom radar clearly pinging that something wasn't adding up. But I wasn't done. Because honestly, I'd been holding this one in for a while, and it felt like the universe had just given me permission to say it out loud. Also, I added, leaning against the wall with my arms still crossed, weren't you in Miami 3 weeks ago for that conference? The one where you posted 17 Instagram stories from hotel bars and exactly 0 photos from any actual conference sessions? The one where your conference buddy Jake somehow appeared in half your photos, looking very unconference-like. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that has weight to it. Heavy, thick, awkward silence that made everyone in the room suddenly very interested in looking at their shoes, or the ceiling, or literally anywhere except at each other. Clarissa's mouth opened and closed like a goldfish. No sound came out. No defense. No explanation. No indignant denial. Just silence. Jennifer quietly said, "I think maybe we should go." "That's probably a good idea," I agreed. Diane looked at her daughter with an expression I couldn't quite read, somewhere between disappointment and confusion and maybe a little bit of anger. "Clarissa, is there something you need to tell me?" "Mom, it's not," Clarissa started, but Diane held up her hand. "We'll talk about this at home," she said, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard from her before. She turned to me. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I didn't know. I didn't realize." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it. Diane had always been decent to me. This wasn't her fault. "You were just trying to help your daughter. I get it." The whole group started shuffling toward the door like students leaving detention. Ashley wouldn't look at me. Jennifer and the other friends, whose names I honestly still couldn't remember and didn't care to learn, basically speed walked out. Megan paused at the door, opened her mouth like she was going to say something, then apparently thought better of it and left without a word. Smart choice. Clarissa was the last one in the apartment besides me. She stood there in my living room, surrounded by boxes of her stuff, looking smaller somehow than she had when she'd arrived with her backup singers. "Marcus," she said quietly. "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Just don't. Whatever you're about to say, whatever excuse or explanation or justification you've got cooked up, I don't want to hear it. You came here with your mom and your friends to make me feel guilty, to pressure me into taking you back, and when that didn't work, you lied about being pregnant. Do you understand how messed up that is? Do you get how manipulative and cruel that is?" "I wasn't," she started. "You were," I interrupted. "You absolutely were. And the Miami thing? I wasn't even sure about that until just now. I was testing a theory. But your face told me everything I needed to know." She looked like she might cry, and for a split second, I almost felt bad. Almost. But then I remembered Saturday night, remembered her voice sing "Worthless Loser" in front of all those people, remembered all the little digs and comments and moments over the past 4 years where she'd made it clear that I wasn't quite good enough for her vision of what her life should be. "Your stuff will be ready by tomorrow," I said. "You can come get it, or you can send someone to get it, but either way, I want you out of my apartment and out of my life. We're done, Clarissa. We've been done for a while. This is just making it official." She left without another word, and I watched through the window as the whole group got into Ashley's SUV and drove away. I went back to packing her stuff, and honestly, the boxes felt lighter somehow. Or maybe I just felt lighter. Either way, I packed up the last 4 years of my life into cardboard boxes from U-Haul, labeled them clearly, and stacked them by the door. Trevor called later to check on me. "How'd the intervention go?" "She told them she was pregnant," I said. "What?" "Don't worry, she's not. She also might have been cheating on me in Miami." "What?" "Yeah, it's been a day. How's your Saturday going?" He laughed. "Not nearly as interesting as yours. You okay?" I looked around my apartment, my clean, quiet, drama-free apartment that was slowly starting to feel like mine again. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, I really am." Monday morning, I was under a kitchen sink in a condo in Riverside, replacing a garbage disposal that had apparently decided to become a modern art installation instead of doing its actual job, when my phone started blowing up. Not just a few texts here and there, but that constant buzzing that means either someone died or something went viral. Given that nobody in my immediate family knew how to use social media beyond posting minion memes on Facebook, I figured it was probably the latter. I wiped my hands on my work pants, pulled out my phone, and saw about 15 texts from Trevor, each one more excited than the last. "Dude, check your email. Your boss is calling you. This is wild. Call me now." The man had a real gift for building suspense without actually providing useful information, which is probably why he worked in IT support, where being vague and unhelpful is practically a job requirement. Then my actual boss called. Bob Richardson, owner of Richardson HVAC, a man who normally only called me if there was an emergency or if he'd accidentally pocket-dialed me, which happened more often than you'd think for a guy who sells climate control systems for a living. I answered, expecting him to tell me about some urgent job that needed my immediate attention. Marcus, he said, and I could hear something in his voice. Amusement, maybe? I just got an interesting email this morning. Someone claiming that you've been stealing equipment from the company. My stomach dropped. What? Bob, I haven't stolen anything. You can check inventory. You can check my truck. You can. He laughed. Actually laughed. Relax, kid. I know you haven't stolen anything. We already checked. Nothing's missing. Not a single wrench out of place. But let me guess who sent this email. Initials CJ. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Clarissa Johnson? Bingo. She sent this whole detailed email about how you've been misappropriating company resources and how I should investigate your criminal activity immediately. The woman used the word malfeasance. Marcus, who uses the word malfeasance in a real email. Someone who thinks watching legal dramas makes them a lawyer, I muttered. Anyway, we checked everything out. You're completely clear, and I just wanted to give you a heads up that your ex-wife is apparently trying to get you fired. Thought you should know. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate you checking first instead of just believing her. Marcus, you've worked for me for 6 years. You're one of my best guys. I'm not going to fire you because some angry ex sends me an email that reads like she used a thesaurus for every other word. But hey, speaking of which, I heard you're starting your own company. My heart did a little skip. Yeah, I am. I was going to tell you officially next week. I'm giving proper notice. I'm not poaching clients. I'm doing everything by the book. I know you are, Bob said, and he sounded almost proud. You're a good guy, Marcus. You're going to do well on your own. Just promise me you won't completely destroy my business with your superior customer service and reasonable prices. I laughed. I'll try to leave you some clients. That's all I ask. Now get back to work. And Marcus? Change your locks if you haven't already. Way ahead of you, boss. I hung up and immediately called Trevor, who answered before the first ring even finished. Did you see? He said, skipping right past any normal greeting. See what? I just got off the phone with my boss about Clarissa trying to get me fired for stealing equipment I didn't steal. Oh man, it gets better. Check Instagram. Check Twitter. Check literally anywhere. She posted this whole thing on her Instagram stories about, when you date down, they drag you down, with this sad, filtered selfie that I'm pretty sure she took 17 times to get the right angle. I opened Instagram while walking back to my truck, and sure enough, there it was. Clarissa's story, posted about 3 hours ago, a black and white photo of her looking wistfully off to the side like she was auditioning for a role in a sad indie film about beautiful people having first world problems. The text overlay said, when you date down, they drag you down. Sometimes the trash takes itself out. Hashtag self-worth, hashtag know your value, hashtag moving on. I stared at it for a second, processing the absolute audacity of this woman to post something like that after everything that had happened, and then I started scrolling through the responses. And that's when I understood why Trevor was so excited. See, here's the thing about having a public meltdown at a party with 30 witnesses in the age of smartphones. People record stuff. And apparently, multiple people at Clarissa's birthday party had recorded her little worthless loser speech and decided that this Instagram story was the perfect time to share those videos with the world. The comments section had become a digital crime scene, and Clarissa was the victim of her own evidence. The first comment was from someone named at JessicaMartin_23. Girl, we were all there. We saw what you did. This is not the flex you think it is. Attached was a 10-second video of Clarissa, wine glass in hand, saying clear as day, you're a worthless loser. You fix air conditioners for a living. How embarrassing is that? The second comment, from @Brian_Chin, maybe don't call your husband a loser at your birthday party if you don't want people to think you're the problem. Another video, different angle, showing the entire scene including my calm exit. Then came @Melissac_Fitness. I was at this party. He set up everything. He was nothing but nice to everyone. And she humiliated him in front of all of us. This post is wild. The comments kept coming, and they were brutal. Someone had even posted a split-screen comparison of Clarissa's Instagram post with one of the videos from the party, pointing out the irony of her talking about being dragged down when the videos clearly showed her doing the dragging. My personal favorite comment came from @DavidMorrison88. Imagine calling your landlord a loser while living rent-free in his apartment. The math ain't matting. I screenshot that one and sent it to Trevor with 3 laughing emojis. But wait, it gets better. Because apparently some of Clarissa's friends, former friends, I should say, had decided that this Instagram post was their opportunity to share their own stories. Megan, yes, that Megan who'd been at the intervention, commented, "Clarissa, I love you, but we all knew Marcus was holding things together. Maybe reflect before you post." The comment had 127 likes. Another friend, someone I vaguely remembered from various brunches, wrote, "I always thought Marcus was great. He was always kind, always helpful. Maybe the problem wasn't him." Even some people I didn't know started piling on. The whole thing had apparently been shared to some local community group, and random strangers were weighing in with their opinions about relationship dynamics and public humiliation and whether calling someone a loser at their own party was ever justified. It had become a whole thing, a legitimate social media event, and Clarissa was losing the court of public opinion by a landslide. Trevor sent me another text. "Dude, there are now 3 different videos from different angles. It's like the Zapruder film of birthday party breakups." I couldn't help but laugh. The whole situation was absurd. Here I was, trying to move on with my life, start my business, be a mature adult about a painful situation, and the internet had decided to turn my marriage into a trending topic. Part of me felt bad for Clarissa. This kind of public humiliation couldn't feel good, even if she'd brought it on herself. But then I remembered Saturday night, remembered her voice, remembered the way she'd looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, and the sympathy evaporated pretty quickly. By lunchtime, Clarissa had deleted the Instagram story, but of course, the internet is forever. People had screenshot everything, and those screenshots were making the rounds on various platforms. Someone had even created a meme using one of the party videos with the caption, "When you call someone a loser, but you're the one who ends up losing." It had been shared 3,000 times. My phone rang again. This time it was Mrs. Patterson, my client with the beach house. "Marcus, honey, I just saw the most interesting video on Facebook." "Oh no," I said. "Oh yes," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "I always thought your wife was a bit much, if I'm being honest. Too concerned with appearances, you know? But that video, my goodness, you handled that with such grace." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'm just trying to move forward. Well, I told my bridge club about your new company, and 3 of them need work done. I'm sending you their numbers. Consider it my contribution to your fresh start." After I hung up with her, I sat in my truck for a minute, eating a sandwich and watching the comments continue to roll in on Clarissa's various social media posts. The internet had spoken, and the verdict was clear. She'd messed up, and everyone knew it. Trevor called during his lunch break. "So, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfying is it to watch the internet defend you?" "I'm not gonna lie," I said. "It's pretty satisfying, but also kind of sad. Like, this is really how our marriage ends. With viral videos and angry comments." "Hey man, she chose to make it public when she decided to humiliate you in front of 30 people. The internet just decided to weigh in. That's not on you." He was right, of course. I hadn't posted anything. I hadn't shared any videos. I hadn't made any dramatic statements on social media. I'd just walked away, tried to move on, and the truth had caught up with Clarissa all on its own. Turns out, when you treat people badly in public, the public has opinions about it. That evening, I got a text from an unknown number. "This is Ashley, Clarissa's sister. She's really upset about those videos. Can you ask people to take them down?" I stared at the text for a long moment, considering my response. Finally, I typed back, "I didn't post them. I don't control what other people do." Maybe she should have thought about that before she said those things in public. The response came quickly. "You're being petty." "No," I replied. "I'm being done. There's a difference." I blocked the number and went back to working on my business plan. Because here's the thing about going viral for the right reasons. It's excellent for business. My phone had been ringing all day with people who'd seen the videos, felt bad for me, and wanted to support my new company. Some were people I knew, some were friends of friends, and some were complete strangers who just liked the idea of giving their money to someone who seemed like a decent human being instead of a faceless corporation. By the end of the day, I had 7 new clients lined up, and my calendar for the next 2 weeks was completely full. The Worthless Loser was booked solid, and honestly, it felt pretty great. Turns out, sometimes karma doesn't just exist. It goes viral, gets shared 3,000 times, and comes with a side of new business opportunities. I texted Trevor. Remember when she said I'd regret leaving? He replied immediately, yeah? I think she might have gotten that backwards. 2 weeks after the great Instagram debacle of my failed marriage, I was starting to feel like maybe, just maybe, life was finally settling into some kind of normal rhythm. My business was picking up momentum faster than I'd expected. I'd moved back into my apartment, which now felt like an actual home instead of a museum dedicated to throw pillows and passive-aggressive tension, and I hadn't heard from Clarissa in almost 5 days. 5 glorious, peaceful, drama-free days. I should have known it was too good to last. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was doing a maintenance check on a commercial unit for a small law office downtown when I got a call from Miguel, the doorman at my building. "Hey Marcus," he said, and his voice had that tone that immediately made my stomach drop. And I need to let her in. I told her you'd changed the locks, and she wasn't on the approved guest list anymore. She's currently in the lobby having what I can only describe as a full meltdown. Like, I've seen. Police came, told her to leave. She left screaming about lawsuits. Just FYI. The next morning, I got the letter. It arrived via certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it, which meant the postal worker got to witness my face as I read the return address and realized what it was. "Legal correspondence," she said cheerfully. "Have a great day." I opened it in my truck, and honestly, it was a masterpiece of legal-adjacent nonsense. The letterhead said Peterson and Associates, which sounded official enough, and it was signed by someone named Todd Peterson, ESQ, who I immediately Googled and discovered had graduated from law school approximately 3 years ago, and based on his Yelp reviews, specialized in small claims court and disappointing his clients. The letter was something else. It started with "Dear Mr. Marcus Johnson," which was already wrong because that's not how you address someone in a formal letter, but okay. Then it launched into this elaborate explanation of how I had unlawfully evicted Clarissa from her residence and had caused her severe emotional distress, reputational harm, and financial hardship by changing the locks without proper notice and publicly humiliating her through social media proxies. Social media proxies. Like I'd hired a team of people to post those party videos. Like I'd orchestrated some kind of elaborate revenge campaign instead of just walking away and letting the truth speak for itself. But here's where it got really good. The letter demanded, and I quote, "immediate restitution in the amount of $15,000 for emotional damages, plus an additional $5,000 for the cost of temporary housing and relocation expenses, to be paid within 30 days, or we will pursue further legal action including, but not limited to filing a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress." I read it 3 times, each time getting more amused. $15,000 for emotional distress? The woman had called me a worthless loser in front of 30 people, tried to fake a pregnancy to manipulate me, possibly cheated on me in Miami, attempted to get me fired from my job, and now she wanted me to pay her for the emotional distress of experiencing consequences for her own actions? The audacity was actually impressive in a sort of horrible way. I called Trevor immediately. "Dude, you're not going to believe this. She's suing you? How did you know?" "Because she posted on Instagram about taking legal action against her abuser about an hour ago. The comments are, well, they're not supporting her theory." I pulled up Instagram and sure enough, there it was. Another filtered selfie, this one with her looking brave and determined with the caption, "Sometimes you have to fight back against those who try to destroy you. Taking legal action against my abuser. No one should have to go through what I've been through. Hashtag speak your truth, hashtag legal action, hashtag strong women." The top comment, with 847 likes, said, "Girl, we all saw the videos. You're not the victim here." Another one, "Abuser? He literally just changed his locks to his own apartment." And my personal favorite, "I'm a family law attorney, and this ain't it. Delete this before your actual lawyer sees it." But I had a more immediate problem, which was this demand letter asking for 20 grand. I needed actual legal advice, not just internet comments and my own sense of righteous indignation. Fortunately, I had a friend who owed me a favor. Gavin Matthews and I had gone to high school together, and he'd become the kind of lawyer who did family law and helped people navigate messy divorces, which meant he'd seen every manipulation tactic in the book. I'd fixed his AC last summer during a heat wave and refused to charge him because that's what friends do, and he'd told me if I ever needed legal help, he'd return the favor. I called in that favor. "Marcus, my man," he answered on the second ring. "Please tell me you're calling because your AC broke and not because your ex-wife is doing something insane." "Option B," I said. "Definitely option B." I met him at his office that afternoon and showed him the letter. He read it, and I watched his expression go from professional to amused to outright laughing. "Oh man," he said, wiping his eyes. "Oh man, this is good. This is really good. Good for me or good for entertainment purposes? Both. Marcus, this letter is garbage. Complete garbage. You didn't evict her because she was never a legal tenant. You changed locks to your own apartment, which you have every right to do. You didn't cause her emotional distress. She caused her own problems by being publicly terrible. And social media proxies? Come on. That's not even a real thing in this context. So what do? Gavin grinned, and it was the grin of a man who loved his job. We respond, and we make it clear that not only is her demand baseless, but if she continues this harassment, we'll countersue for actual damages. Give me an hour. 53 minutes later, Gavin sent me a draft of the response letter, and it was beautiful. Professional, concise, and absolutely devastating. It pointed out that Clarissa had never been a legal tenant, that I had evidence of being the sole financial provider, that the social media posts were made by third parties without my involvement or encouragement, and that her demand for $20,000 was without merit and appears to be a continued pattern of harassment following the dissolution of the relationship. But the best part was the closing paragraph. Additionally, we have become aware of social media posts made by your client wherein she discusses this legal matter publicly and makes defamatory statements about our client. We have documented these posts, including video evidence from the incident that precipitated this separation, which clearly contradicts your client's narrative. Should your client continue this pattern of harassment and false accusations, we will have no choice but to pursue legal remedies including, but not limited to, a restraining order and a countersuit for defamation and malicious prosecution. We strongly advise your client to cease all contact with our client and to refrain from making further public statements about this matter. I read it twice and then said to Gavin, "You mentioned the party videos." "Oh yeah," he said, grinning. "I watched them. Everyone's watched them. They're like the most popular videos in our local Facebook groups right now. And they're excellent evidence that your ex-wife's version of events is, shall we say, not based in reality. Can we mention the fake pregnancy thing? Let's keep that in our back pocket for now. But yes, we have that too if we need it. We sent the letter that same day, certified mail, return receipt requested, because if we were doing this, we were doing it properly. And then we waited. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days later, Gavin called me, laughing so hard he could barely speak. She dropped it, he managed to say between gasps. Her lawyer sent a one-sentence email saying they're no longer pursuing the matter. That's it. One sentence. After further review, we have decided not to pursue this matter at this time. I've never seen someone fold faster in my entire career. So it's over? It's over. Well, the lawsuit threat is over. You should still probably file for an actual divorce, but the intimidation tactic failed spectacularly. I hung up and sat in my truck for a minute, processing the fact that I'd just been threatened with a lawsuit, responded appropriately, and watched it dissolve like cotton candy in water. The worthless loser had won again, but honestly, it didn't feel like winning. It just felt like surviving someone else's poor decisions. Trevor bought me a beer that night to celebrate, and as we sat in his living room playing video games like we were still in our 20s, I realized something. I'd spent so much energy over the past few weeks just dealing with Clarissa's drama that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to just exist peacefully. But now, with the legal threat gone and the harassment finally seeming to slow down, I could actually focus on building my life instead of defending it. You know what the best part is? Trevor said, not looking away from the screen. What's that? She paid a lawyer to write that demand letter. Probably cost her at least $500. And she got nothing out of it except looking even more ridiculous. I smiled. That is pretty good. The loser strikes again, Trevor said, and we both laughed. Because sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to engage with crazy and watching it defeat itself. 3 weeks into my new life as a business owner and semi-viral internet sensation, I was starting to think that maybe the universe had finally run out of plot twists for the Marcus and Clarissa saga. I should have known better. The universe has a sick sense of humor and an unlimited special effects budget when it comes to karma, and it was about to deliver its most spectacular scene yet. I was installing a new thermostat for a client in Oakwood when Trevor sent me a text that consisted entirely of emoji. The eyes emoji, the popcorn emoji, and the fire emoji. This was Trevor's way of saying, something dramatic is happening and you need to check your phone immediately. I finished connecting the wires, tested the system to make sure it was working properly, and then stepped outside to call him. Please tell me this is good news for once, I said when he picked up. Oh, it's good news, Trevor said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. It's such good news that I almost feel bad for enjoying it as much as I am. Almost. What happened? Your ex-wife just got fired. I stood there in my client's driveway, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what I'd just heard. What? Fired. Terminated. Let go. Given the old pink slip. Shown the door. Escorted out by security, according to Jessica, who works in the same building. Jessica was Trevor's girlfriend, who worked in marketing for a company on the same floor as Clarissa's office. They'd met at some networking thing and had been dating for about 6 months, which meant Trevor now had access to all the best office gossip from Clarissa's workplace. It was like having our own personal spy network, except instead of international espionage, we were just tracking the downfall of one particularly dramatic woman. Why? I asked, because getting fired seemed like a pretty extreme consequence even for Clarissa's level of chaos. Okay, so apparently someone, and by someone I mean multiple someones, sent the party videos to her company's HR department along with screenshots of all her social media posts about you. The ones where she called you abusive, the ones where she talked about the lawsuit, all of it. And her company, which is all about corporate values and inclusive workplace culture or whatever, decided that having an employee who publicly humiliates and verbally abuses their spouse doesn't really align with their brand. I sat down on the curb because my legs suddenly felt like they couldn't support my weight. Someone sent the videos to her job? Multiple people, apparently. Jessica said HR got at least 5 separate emails over the past week, all with the same videos and screenshots, all pointing out that Clarissa's behavior was problematic and asking if this was really the kind of person the company wanted representing them. I didn't send anything, I said quickly, because I needed Trevor to know that. I didn't have anything to do with this. I know you didn't, man. This was all organic, grassroots karma. The internet decided Clarissa needed consequences and delivered them directly to her employer. You can't orchestrate that kind of thing. It just happens when you piss off enough people publicly. After I hung up with Trevor, I sat there for another few minutes, watching clouds drift across the sky and trying to figure out how I felt about this news. Part of me felt vindicated, like finally, someone in authority had looked at Clarissa's behavior and said, yeah, this isn't okay. But another part of me felt kind of bad, because losing your job sucks no matter who you are or what you've done. I sat with those two feelings for a while, and eventually, the vindication won out. Not because I'm a bad person, but because Clarissa had spent the last month trying to destroy my life, my reputation, and my career, and this felt less like revenge and more like balance being restored to the universe. I finished up with my client, collected payment, and drove back to my apartment. I was looking forward to a quiet evening of ordering pizza and working on my business accounting, which I realize makes me sound about as exciting as a tax seminar, but honestly, peace and quiet had become my new favorite luxury. I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building and was about to get out of my truck when I saw her. Clarissa was sitting in her car, that champagne-colored BMW that she'd leased despite me telling her it was way outside our budget, and by our budget, I meant my budget since I was the one paying all the bills, and she was crying. Not the pretty, strategic crying from her Instagram posts, but actual ugly crying. The kind with mascara running down your face and your nose turning red and your whole body shaking with sobs. For a second, I considered just walking past her car and going inside. I didn't know her anything. She'd burned every bridge between us and then tried to blow up the riverbank for good measure. But there was something about seeing another human being in that much pain, even a human being who'd caused me a significant amount of pain, that made me stop. I stood there in the parking lot, keys in hand, having a full internal debate with myself about whether basic human decency required me to check on her or whether self-preservation meant I should run away like my hair was on fire. Unfortunately for my evening plans, basic human decency won. I walked over to her car and tapped on the window. She jumped like I'd fired a gun, looked up at me with eyes that were so swollen and red she could barely open them, and for a moment, I saw actual fear cross her face, like she thought I was there to gloat or make things worse. That look bothered me more than I wanted to admit. She rolled down the window a crack, just enough to talk through, but not enough that I could reach in, which was probably smart given our recent history. "What do you want?" she asked, and her voice was hoarse from crying. "I heard what happened," I said, keeping my distance and my tone neutral. "With your job. Are you here to celebrate?" She shot back, but there was no real fire behind it. She sounded exhausted, defeated, like she'd used up all her fight and had nothing left but sadness. "No," I said honestly. "I'm not. I didn't have anything to do with it, Clarissa. I didn't send anything to your company. I didn't tell anyone to send anything. This wasn't me." She laughed, but it was bitter and broken. "It doesn't matter if it was you or not. My life is ruined, Marcus. I lost my job. I lost my apartment. I lost my husband. I lost everything, and it's all because of you." And there it was. Even in her lowest moment, even sitting in a car in a parking lot crying so hard she could barely breathe, she still couldn't take responsibility for her own actions. It was still my fault. I was still the villain in her story. I took a deep breath, trying to decide how honest I wanted to be. I could be kind. I could comfort her. I could tell her it would get better and help would come and this too shall pass. Or I could tell her the truth. I chose truth. "No, Clarissa," I said quietly. "You lost your job because people saw how you treated me and decided they didn't want to work with someone like that. You lost your apartment because it was never yours to begin with. You were living rent-free in my place. And you didn't lose your husband. You threw him away when you called him a worthless loser in front of 30 people. I didn't ruin your life. You did that all by yourself." She stared at me through that crack in the window, tears still streaming down her face, and for a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd actually hear what I was saying. That she'd have some kind of breakthrough moment where she realized that actions have consequences and treating people badly eventually catches up with you. Instead, she said, "You're such a bastard." I shrugged. "Maybe, but at least I'm an honest bastard who paid his bills and didn't call his spouse garbage in public. Look, you need to leave. You don't live here anymore, and sitting in the parking lot crying isn't going to change anything." "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, and there was real panic in her voice now. "I don't have anywhere to go, Marcus. I don't have any money. I don't have." "You have your mom," I interrupted. "You have your sister. You have those friends who came with you to try to guilt-trip me into taking you back. Call one of them. Figure it out. But you can't stay here, and you can't keep showing up at my home or my job expecting me to fix your problems. We're done, Clarissa. We've been done. You need to accept that and move on." She looked at me with such hatred that I actually took a step back. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "You know what?" I said, and I felt this weird sense of calm wash over me. "I am. For the first time in years, I'm actually happy. My business is doing great. I have clients who respect me. I have friends who support me. I sleep well at night because I'm not constantly worried about saying or doing the wrong thing and getting torn apart for it. So yeah, Clarissa, I am happy. And I'm sorry you're not. But that's not my responsibility anymore." I turned and walked toward my apartment building, and I didn't look back. I heard her car start up, heard the engine rev a little too hard like she was angry at the vehicle itself, and heard her tires squeal as she pulled out of the parking lot probably faster than was safe or legal. I stood in the lobby for a minute, watching through the glass doors to make sure she actually left and didn't try to follow me inside, and then I went up to my apartment. Trevor called about an hour later. Jessica said Clarissa showed up at their office building after she got fired, trying to argue with security about getting back in to get her stuff. They had to threaten to call the cops. "She's having a full breakdown." "I know," I said. "She was in my parking lot crying when I got home." "Did you talk to her?" "For about 2 minutes. Told her it wasn't my fault she got fired and that she needed to go stay with family or friends. She called me a bastard and left." "How do you feel?" I thought about it for a minute, really thought about it. "Honestly, I feel bad that another person is suffering, but I don't feel responsible for it. She made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's not on me. That's very mature of you, Trevor said. Well, look on the bright side, I said, opening a beer and settling onto my couch. At least now, when people ask me what happened to my marriage, I can tell them my ex-wife lost her job for being the kind of person who loses jobs for treating people badly. Really streamlines the whole explanation process. Trevor laughed. That's dark, man. Yeah, well, it's been a dark month. I'm entitled to a little dark humor. The next morning, I woke up to discover that Clarissa had posted another Instagram story. This one about losing everything to a narcissist and corporate America not supporting women. The comments section was even less sympathetic than before. Someone had posted a link to one of the party videos with the caption, "Is this what supporting women looks like?" Another person wrote, "Maybe don't verbally abuse people if you want to keep your job in corporate America." I blocked her on all social media after that. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. I didn't need to see her descent into victimhood documented in real time. I had a business to run, clients to serve, and a life to build. Whatever she was going through, however she was dealing with the consequences of her actions, that was her journey now, not mine. And you know what? I slept great that night. 6 weeks after walking out of that birthday party, my company, which I'd officially renamed BT Climate Control, short for Better Than Clarissa, because I'm petty and proud of it, was absolutely killing it. Word spreads fast in this business, especially when you're the guy who got publicly humiliated and then turned it into motivation instead of a midlife crisis. Megan, yes, that Megan who'd been at the intervention looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her Louboutins, actually DM'd me on Instagram. "Marcus, I owe you an apology. After you left that day, we all started really talking, and we realized you were the one keeping Clarissa's life together. She's been struggling. Anyway, my boyfriend runs a clinic and they need HVAC work. Interested? One installation turned into 4 more contracts. Apparently, being the good guy in a viral breakup is excellent for business." 2 months later, I ran into Diane at a coffee shop. She actually apologized, saying Clarissa had finally told her everything, including Miami. "You didn't deserve any of that, Marcus. I'm sorry we didn't see it sooner." I thanked her. Closure felt good. The following week, I was filling up gas when I saw her. Clarissa, driving a beat-up 2005 Honda Civic that coughed like a chain smoker, pulled up 2 pumps over. She looked tired, worn down, nothing like the confident woman who'd called me worthless in front of 30 people. She saw my new truck. White, shiny, with BT Climate Control. "We fix what's broken," in bold letters on the side. Our eyes met for half a second. She froze, turned away quickly, and didn't say a word. Trevor asked later, "You good?" "Better than good," I said. I just followed her advice. What advice? She told me to stop being her loser. So I did. Now I'm my own boss, living my best life, and honestly, the worthless loser is doing pretty damn well.